Chapter 50. After a long time, Tong Jia got up from the ground and looked at the little thing in Rinpochien's hand with fear. He took 3 big steps back as if he had seen a ghost. Rinpochien looked at Tong Jia's expression and felt a little embarrassed. He smiled kindly, but Tong Jia hid further away when he saw his smile. However, Dayo people's resistance to electric shocks was average. They were only slightly stronger than the burly men on Earth. It seemed like the boss was not lying when he said that a burly man could be knocked unconscious. Although Tong Jia did not faint, he trembled for a long time and fell to the ground. He only recovered after a long time. "How do you feel?" Rinpochian asked Tong Jia. "Numb, can't exert any strength, feel nauseous and a little painful." "What is that?" Tong Jia hid far away from Rinpochian and even retched to the side. Well, it was similar to how Earthlings felt after being electrocuted. Rinpochian waved his hand at Tong Jia, stuffed the electric baton at his waist, and strolled to the field. From afar he saw a few people sitting at the edge of the field and chatting. When they saw Rinpochian, they patted their butts and greeted, "Caretaker Ren. I'm just here to take a look." Rinpochian scanned the field with his eyes as he spoke. He could tell that the field had just been watered. "Remember to water it regularly, or else the sun is too strong. After a week, the new sprouts will be able to withstand the sun," Rinpochian exhorted. "Caretaker Ren, don't worry, we will remember this," the few odd job workers replied. After Rinpochian confirmed it, he relaxed and sat at the entrance. "Brother Ren," Caretaker Sure walked over from afar, "the 2 shaved ice shops are opening for business today. Do you want to go and take a look? You are the one who suggested this business, but you have not been there until now." After listening to Caretaker Sure, Rinpochian thought for a while. Since he had nothing to do, he might as well follow them. Rinpochian grabbed the 2 little fellows by their necks and pulled them down from his legs. He got up and went back to his house to take some silver and followed Caretaker Sure out. The 2 shaved ice shops were located at Gujiazhai and Yewol. The best location at Jingyang Avenue had not been fully installed yet. The 2 of them went to Gujiazhai first. This was the main residential area for the commoners and also the largest district in the city. The shop was located at the end of the street, and there were only a few people in front of the shop. It was a far cry from what Rinpochian had expected. According to Rinpochian's expectations, even if it wasn't crowded, there should at least be a large group of people. But what he saw now was a burly man sitting on a stool at the door with a towel draped over his shoulder. There was only one person standing behind the bar counter. There was no one else. "Hey Dad, why are you here?" When the burly man sitting at the entrance saw Rinpochian and Caretaker Sure walking over, he stood up from his stool and took 2 steps forward. The moment he opened his mouth, his voice traveled half a street away. The voices of this father and son were definitely passed down from generation to generation. Just by listening to this voice, Rinpochian dared to say that this was definitely their biological son. Furthermore, the son had surpassed the father. In the future, if someone were to offend him, he would not have to do anything else. He could just ask Caretaker Sure and his son to sit beside him and chat. That person would probably break down in less than an hour. "You brat, you're still talking. I brought someone over to see how you guys are doing," Caretaker Sure yelled at Rinpochian. Rinpochian's head buzzed. He immediately scuttled backward like a startled rabbit. He jumped 3 steps in a row before he felt that he was out of the range of the duo's sonic boom. Usually, when Caretaker Sure was the only one speaking, Rinpochian would have to stretch his head further away. After some time, Caretaker Sure realized that he could still lower his voice. Of course, that was only relative to Rinpochian. Now that both father and son were here, it was better for him to hide further away. "Brother Ren, this is my son, Sure Qingshan." Caretaker Sure introduced his son while reaching out to place his hand on Rinpochian's shoulder. When he turned his head again, Rinpochian, who was just beside him, was now 2 meters behind him. "Brother Ren, why are you lagging behind? Let me introduce you, this is my son." Caretaker Sure waved at Rinpochian. Rinpochian's feet seemed to have grown roots and he refused to move forward no matter what. He cupped his hands and said, "Hello, hello. Are you the Caretaker Ren that my father mentioned? My father said that you are a smart person and know a lot of things." Shi Qingshan walked to caretaker Shi's side and spoke to Rinpochen. Half of the people on the street turned their heads to look at him. Rinpochen was embarrassed. To be called smart in front of him, it seemed that he had not had the chance to do so since he graduated from primary school. Especially when half of the people on the street heard it, it was really too shameful. Someone not far away immediately laughed. Caretaker Shi turned his head and looked over. It was a shop that was opened by the Yun nation and specialized in selling daily necessities. The shop owner stood at the door and could not hide his smile. "Are you mocking my brother?" Caretaker Shi's words were full of malice. Even though he had been in Dayo for a long time, his fierce-looking face was still very intimidating to the shop owner. "Why would I?" I suddenly recalled something from the past. The shop owner laughed. "Forget it, let's talk inside." Rinpochen walked forward with an awkward look on his face. Caretaker Shi glared at the shop owner before bringing his son into the shop. After the few of them entered, the shop owner sneered. "Smart people? There are many smart people in this world, especially when compared to you Dayo people. Everyone in the Yun nation is smart." He looked at the shop beside him and pondered for a long time. Until now, he still did not know what the shop did. A restaurant was not a restaurant, and a shop was not a shop. Initially, he saw that there were many tables inside and thought that it was a restaurant. Only later did he realize that it was not a restaurant. Forget it, who cares about them? The shop had been open for a long time, but there was not a single person inside. No one knew what was sold inside. If they were to do business like this, it would close sooner or later. The weather was too hot, and it was better to stay indoors where it would be cooler. The shop owner could not be bothered with the shop next door. He turned around and went back to find a place to rest. After entering the shop, Rinpochen sized it up. There were almost no changes in the shop. It was just tidied up, cleaner, and there were a few more tables and chairs. "Not a single person in the morning?" Caretaker Shi asked. "No." Shi Qingshan touched the back of his head. He had a simple and honest look on his face and lowered his voice. It seemed that they were used to speaking like that outside. When they returned to the house, they would subconsciously lower their voice. It was the same for ordinary people. Their voices were generally louder outside than inside. This was a kind of habit. One could only blame this father and son pair for being too loud. Rinpochen walked one round in the house and frowned. Suddenly he thought of a problem. Why did he not see the signboard on the shop when he came in just now? "Where's the signboard?" Rinpochen stretched out his hand and pointed outside the door. "The signboard above the door, it's not up yet, right? It was supposed to be delivered this morning, but old Lu drank too much last night. In the morning he said that it was almost done. It will be delivered in the afternoon," Shi Qingshan replied honestly. There was not even a signboard, and no one knew what this shop was for. It would be strange if someone could enter. Chapter 51. An hour later, there was an additional table at the entrance of the shaved ice shop. The person who previously stood behind the bar counter was called Shi Shigu. This name sounded cultured, but he was still a burly man. He was from the same family as caretaker Shi. At this moment, he was cutting fruits at the entrance of the shop and scraping the ice. First, he scraped the ice off layer by layer. Then he placed the fruit pulp inside and poured some fruit juice over it. Just like that, a bowl of fresh shaved ice was made. Meanwhile, Shi Qingshan displayed his talent with his loud voice and shouted, "Shaved ice! Fruit shaved ice! Cool down and quench thirst! Come and try shaved ice on such a hot day!" Once he shouted, half the street could hear him. Rinpochen held the freshly made shaved ice and slurped it, putting spoonfuls of it into his mouth. Eating shaved ice on such a hot day was indeed comfortable. After a while, caretaker Shi also held the freshly made shaved ice and sat beside Rinpochen. A few pedestrians who were sweating profusely came over and stretched their heads over the table. "What's this?" "Fruit shaved ice. This is ice that can only be found in the north. Eating it on such a hot day will immediately relieve the heat and cool down from head to toe," Shi Qingshan said. Those few people were tempted when they saw Rinpochen and caretaker Shi holding the orange shaved ice drizzled with fruit juice. They asked, How much is it? 5 coins. If it doesn't taste good, you can smash my stall. Shi Qingshan gestured with his palm. Give me 1. A burly man immediately shouted. All right, watermelon, orange, or green lotus. Which flavor do you want? Shi Shigu asked while scraping the ice. Watermelon. The burly man looked at the watermelon shaved ice in Rinpochien's hands. After a while, the shaved ice with fruit pulp drizzled with fruit juice was placed in his hands. The burly man sized it up. Are those fine pieces of shaved ice? After putting a spoonful of it into his mouth, the burly man's eyes widened. So cold. Not bad, not bad. Good stuff. The burly man took the lead and waved the spoon in his hands so fast that it almost left after images. Seeing him like this, the others also became interested. Give me 1. Give me 1 with orange. Not long after, there were 7 or 8 people around, all waiting for the shaved ice. This thing was made quickly, but it took a bit of effort to scrape the ice down. After a while, everyone had one. As for the burly man, he was already eating his second one with a satisfied look on his face. Oh, there's poison. The burly man suddenly clutched his chest, and his expression changed. Hearing that it was poisoned, the others almost threw their bowls away. Toxic your sister. Rinpochen couldn't help but say, your stomach must have been irritated by eating so much cold food in such a short period of time. Everyone looked at the bowl in their hands, looked at Rinpochen, and then looked at the burly man. There was complete silence. The burly man had a constipated expression on his face. His open vest revealed his pectoralis major, which was trembling. After a while, he recovered and looked at the bowl in his hand. That scared me. I thought I was poisoned. Then she looked at him in surprise and asked, How did you know? Isn't this common knowledge in the north? Rinpochen rolled his eyes. Anyway, this was common knowledge on Earth. Eating a big mouthful of ice cream could easily irritate your stomach and cause stomach pain. Moreover, you were waving your spoon like a phantom, and you ate 2 bowls in a row. It would be strange if your stomach didn't hurt. Do you really think you're made of iron? Seeing that the burly man was fine, everyone was relieved. Someone asked Shi Qingshan and simply went into the house to eat. The big man looked at the bowl in his hand. Shopkeeper, can I take it away? Bring your own bowl, Shi Qingshan said. Only then did the burly man put down his bowl and squeeze out of the crowd. Rinpochen and caretaker Shi watched from the side for a while. There were more and more people buying shaved ice. There were also some people sitting in the shop. Rinpochen and caretaker Shi finally felt at ease. They rejected caretaker Shi's idea of going to another shop to take a look and strolled back. This way, as long as the reputation of the shaved ice shop spread, there wouldn't be any problems. With Daeyo's scorching hot weather, Rinpochen wouldn't believe that the shaved ice shop wasn't profitable. Qi Zixuan, I heard that you are the #1 expert in Daeyo and one of the top 10 experts in the world. I, Long Wanli of Hanbei, am here to seek your guidance. Suddenly, a thunderous voice resounded through the air, causing the entire Jingyang Road to fall silent. Qi Zixuan, I heard that you are the #1 expert in Daeyo and one of the top 10 experts in the world. Hanbei Long Wanli is here to seek guidance. After 3 consecutive voices, the entire Jingyang Avenue became noisy. Countless people came out of the shops on both sides of the street and looked in the direction of the voice. When Rinpochen heard this voice, he immediately became interested. Is this a challenge? Listening to this voice, it's 10 streets ahead of caretaker Shi and his son. He's definitely an expert. Let's go and see where it is. Rinpochen was excited. After being here for so many days, this was the first time he encountered such a situation. Even though there were daily fights in the city, where fists met flesh and people were frequently kicked out, it wasn't as interesting as a duel between experts. It's the Imperial City. Caretaker Shi quickened his pace. Not only the 2 of them, but many other people also squeezed forward and directly brought the 2 of them into the crowd. Rinpochen, who was squeezing through the crowd, was slightly stunned when he heard caretaker Shi. Who's Qi Zixuan? It's Her Majesty, caretaker Shi said faintly. Only now did Rinpochen know the name of the Empress. Even though he heard that the Empress was the #1 expert in Dayo, he didn't know how to react just now. After all, the Empress didn't look old, and there were many civil and military officials in the imperial court. There were also experts who popped out of nowhere. Renbachien had always thought that the so-called #1 expert in Dayo was an exaggeration. Looking at the current situation, that person was really the #1 expert? Originally, Renbachien thought that he was here to challenge a general. He didn't expect it to be the Empress. Renbachien couldn't help but say that this person came to the capital to challenge the Empress. This person won't be shot to death by thousands of arrows, right? Renbachien asked subconsciously. That depends on Her Majesty's mood, Caretaker Shi said uncertainly. Will Her Majesty really fight? Renbachien asked curiously. Wouldn't it be a little too degrading for the Empress to personally fight and kill others? Furthermore, if there were any mishaps, it would be a big problem. As the saying goes, a gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall. Even though there was no such saying in Dayo, the Empress in the throne room wouldn't fight and kill others, right? That depends on Her Majesty's mood, Caretaker Shi repeated. Have you seen Her Majesty fight before? Renbachien heard that the Empress seemed to have fought more than once. Of course I have. Last year, there were more than 10 people who wanted to challenge Her Majesty. This year, there's only one. Have they been beaten into submission? Renbachien asked. Just now, that person said that the Empress was one of the top 10 experts in the world? It sounded impressive. They have all been beaten to death. Caretaker Shi sneered. Chapter 52. Just now, that person mentioned the top 10 experts. What's going on? Renbachien asked another question. I heard that it was arranged by someone from Great Xia. Anyway, we don't care about this, Caretaker Shi replied casually. They didn't care, but Renbachien was very interested. Who arranged it? Which top 10 experts are they? Who else does Dayo have? I don't know who did it, but someone did it, and then the news spread. I only knew about it because they would shout like that every time they came. Caretaker Shi sneered. It was obvious that he was very disdainful of these people's loud shouts that startled the entire city every time they came. However, Renbachien felt that he was unhappy with the fact that the other party's voice was louder than his. It said that His Majesty is ranked 7th, and the general who supports the nation, Hongwu, is ranked 9th. I'm not sure about the rest, but most of them are from Great Xia. There's one from the Yun nation and one from the Qin nation. Renbachien was overwhelmed with emotions as he listened. Which youngster didn't dream of becoming an expert? He had also been that age. Although he felt that he could only dream of becoming a peerless master, he could still shout 666 from the side. Even so, Renbachien was still very interested in the level of martial arts in this world. He didn't know if there was any mysterious qi or something like that. The two of them moved forward along with the crowd. When they passed by Beihong district, they could see that many of the mansions of the court officials on both sides of the street had their doors open. A few burly men were standing on stools, looking forward. He could already see the palace walls when he raised his head. However, there were too many people, so he couldn't see where the challenger was. Many people stopped outside the square in front of the palace. However, with a group of burly men standing in front of him, Renbachien couldn't see anything. After jumping a few times, he finally saw a lone person standing in the square in front of the palace. Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, Renbachien said as he tried to squeeze his way forward. However, he was pushed back by someone's butt. Damn it! Renbachien cursed. Just as Renbachien was hesitating whether he should shout out, "You pooped in your pants," the row of soldiers standing on top of the palace wall neatly parted to both sides. Soon after, a lady dressed in red appeared. Your Majesty! Yes, Your Majesty! The surrounding people shouted one after another. Their voices gathered together and soared into the sky. It seemed like this empress was quite loved and respected by the people. It seems like Her Majesty is not in a good mood today, Caretaker Shi said. How do you know? Renbachien was curious. If Her Majesty is in a good mood, she won't bother with people who come to challenge her, Caretaker Shi said. Renbachien pondered for a long time. Did this mean that the Empress would vent her anger on them when she was in a bad mood and ignore them when she was in a good mood? Renbachien remembered caretaker Shi mentioning that all the challengers last year were beaten to death. None of them survived. In other words, none of them came with the Empress in a good mood? Was he too unlucky, or did the Empress have too many bad moods? It was understandable that she was in a bad mood for 2 or 3 days a month, but she couldn't be in a bad mood every day, right? At the thought of this, Renbachien felt a chill on the back of his neck. Fortunately, he had not been executed the last few times he entered the palace. His luck was not bad. When the figure in front of the crowd saw the Empress appear at the top of the city wall, he immediately raised his voice and said, "Qi Xiao, although you are the ruler of a nation, you are also one of the top 10 experts in the world. I, Long Wanli, as a martial artist, have come to seek guidance from you. Please do not be stingy. Arrogant. How dare you shout the Empress's name?" Someone in the crowd immediately scolded. "How can you challenge the Empress whenever you want? You have to get past me first." A burly man strode out from the crowd with a huge saber in his hand. "Me too. Both of you are too weak, let me do it. Do you want to test the sharpness of my saber?" The burly man with the saber immediately glared back at him. He thought to himself that this sentence that he had just learned was indeed imposing. A few generals in the imperial court stepped forward one after another. After exchanging a few words, they started to undermine each other. Long Wanli was indifferent to the scolding and noise behind him. His gaze was fixed on the figure in red on top of the palace wall. At the same time, his aura was constantly rising. Before he came here, he had already challenged 19 experts and won all of them in one battle. His aura was at its sharpest. Some of the experts who were on his path of challenge avoided him one after another. Seeing this situation, he rode straight to the southwest and challenged one of the top 10 experts in the world when he was at his peak. He was also the one who was most likely to fight with him. As for the others, their whereabouts were uncertain, or they were in the midst of a large army. On the contrary, even though the Empress was an empress, she had fought many times. In order to prevent the other party from refusing to fight, she specially challenged him as a martial artist. At this moment, his fighting spirit was soaring and his aura was at its peak. Even those who were closer to him could feel the piercingly cold aura emitted from his body. It was as if he was an unparalleled sharp sword. With just one look, one could feel that his sharpness was unstoppable. Many people were affected by his aura and took a step back one after another. Even Renbachien could feel the sharpness coming from the front. It was as if a saber was right in front of him, giving him a fright. What is this? Aura, fighting spirit, sword intent, who knows what it's called? Caretaker Shi replied indifferently. Anyway, it's that thing. Renbachien composed himself. Even though he was in the crowd and the other party's back was facing him, he still felt that as long as the other party willed it, he could lose his life at any time. This feeling of being on the brink of death was really terrible. It was so terrible that he couldn't help but touch the stun button even though he knew that it was useless. The Empress, who was dressed in red, stood on top of the city gate tower and looked down. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly and she hooked her finger downwards. If it was somewhere else and such a woman hooked her finger at them, many people would definitely let their imaginations run wild. However, at this moment, everyone present could feel a domineering aura emanating from the Empress. She can't even be bothered to talk to you. Come, do it. Long Wanli's aura had already reached its peak. He was just waiting for the Empress's response. At this moment, the sword on his back was unsheathed with a clang, sound and fell into his hand. His entire body transformed into a bolt of lightning and pierced towards the Empress. Everyone could feel his indomitable determination. Awesome, an otherworldly fairy. Renbachien could finally see clearly and was immediately amazed. He didn't know if it was the legendary man and sword become one, but at this moment, the feeling that Long Wanli gave him was that he and his sword had become one. His entire body was emitting an endless sword intent. And this sword really made him feel as if it had flown from the heavens. Even Renbachien was worried for the Empress on the palace wall. Although the Empress was indeed an expert, Rinpochen usually felt that she was a little aloof and had a somewhat oppressive aura. He didn't feel the Empress's strength at all. Therefore, when he saw this sword that seemed to have come from the heavens, Rinpochen couldn't help but feel a little worried. Facing this world-shocking sword, the Empress's expression didn't change at all. When the tip of the sword was directly in front of her, she stretched out her lily-white hand and lightly flicked it. Clang! A crisp sound was heard. The tip of the sword flew straight up into the sky. When the remaining half of the sword was also deflected, the lily-white hand directly imprinted on Long Wanli's chest. Immediately, he flew back at a speed faster than when he came. Just as Rinpochen exclaimed in surprise, the other party flew back at a speed faster than when he left. Bang! Immediately, gravel flew everywhere and dust filled the air. After a long time, when the dust had settled, a large pit appeared on the stone-paved ground. Long Wanli was already dead, and all the bones in his body were broken. When the dust settled, the situation in the field was revealed. And the figure of the Empress on the palace wall had already disappeared. The crowd took a look and immediately dispersed with a hubbub. I thought he would be able to make one more move this time. I didn't expect him to die in one move. However, I finally got to see Her Majesty in action today. This guy is really too weak. I was looking forward to it for so long. Chapter 53. That's it. As soon as Rinpochen finished speaking, he felt someone fall to the side, almost pressing him to the ground. Caretaker Sure? What happened to you? Rinpochen held on to Caretaker Sure and asked in astonishment. Just now, Caretaker Sure was still fine. Why did he suddenly become like this? Caretaker Sure's face trembled. He was speechless for a long time. You got a heart attack because you were too excited just now? Or cerebral infarction? Rinpochen was a little anxious. Caretaker Sure was a good person. He did not want to see anything happen to him. However, upon closer inspection, Caretaker Sure did not look like he was suffering from a heart attack or cerebral infarction. Caretaker Sure was also fine. He was just glaring at Rinpochen with his face twitching. Looking at him, it looked like he had been electrocuted. Rinpochen was shocked when he thought of this. He lowered his head and saw that the stun baton was in his hand. He had subconsciously taken it out after being shocked by that person's imposing manner. Don't tell me I pressed the button and poked Caretaker Sure's body when I was nervous? At the thought of this, he looked at Caretaker Sure's condition again. The more he looked, the more he felt that he had been electrocuted by Professor Young. Rinpochen stuffed the stun baton back to his waist and hurriedly helped Caretaker Sure to sit at the side with an awkward expression on his face. After a long while, Caretaker Sure finally recovered. He looked at Rinpochen as if he had seen a ghost and asked, "What did you poke my thigh with just now?" "A slip of the hand, a slip of the hand." Rinpochen laughed dryly. Just now, he and Caretaker Sure were standing right next to each other. It was impossible for him to deny it even if he wanted to. What exactly is it? Caretaker Sure glared at Rinpochen. Rinpochen laughed dryly and waved the stun baton in front of Caretaker Sure. He did not expect Caretaker Sure to snatch it away. What is this? Just now, his whole body was numb and he couldn't move at all. I can't even exert any strength now. Caretaker Sure fiddled with the electric baton with a curious look on his face. Although the electric baton was made of plastic, in his eyes, it was already very well made. My secret treasure, the stun baton, Rinpochen blurted out. You have a master? Caretaker Sure was surprised. This is the first time I've heard you say that. Rinpochen didn't continue the conversation. He wouldn't be able to continue the conversation as it was originally a joke. How do I use this thing? Caretaker Sure continued to fiddle with the electric baton when he saw that Rinpochen did not answer him. Press the button. As soon as Rinpochen finished speaking, his entire body started trembling. Then he directly fell to the ground. He finally knew what it felt like to be electrocuted. His entire body was numb and in pain. His stomach felt like it was on fire, and he felt nauseous. This feeling was indeed refreshing. In his heart, he wanted to cry but had no tears. Sure enough, as the saying goes, A jar will not break without leaving the well, and a general will not die without leaving the horse. He had only been carrying this electric baton for a day, and he was already in trouble. Caretaker Shi lifted Rinpoche's neck and placed him at his side. After playing with the electric baton for a while with a cheerful look on his face, he self-consciously tucked it into his waist. "Brother Ren, I treat you well, right? I'll play with this thing and pass it to you in a few days," Caretaker Shi nagged beside Rinpoche. Rinpoche felt that he had encountered bandits. Caretaker Shi took about 5 minutes to recover from the electric shock, while Rinpoche took about 15 minutes to recover. Furthermore, Caretaker Shi only touched his body briefly before withdrawing the electric baton. When Rinpoche could finally move, Caretaker Shi patted his butt and stood up. He had a carefree look on his face. He did not hold a grudge against Rinpoche for poking him with the electric baton previously. Rinpoche got up from the ground and moved his arms and legs. He looked at the electric baton at Caretaker Shi's waist and weighed the difference in size between him and Caretaker Shi. He decided to buy a few more as backup after he returned. At this moment, a group of soldiers in front of the plaza were filling the huge pit with soil. When Rinpoche was placed at the side by Caretaker Shi, he could see the plaza. It seemed that no one had carried that person out. They actually buried him with soil. This made Rinpoche feel rather horrified. This act of destroying the corpse and destroying the evidence was too open and aboveboard. However, looking at the momentum of that person flying upside down and crashing onto the ground, he reckoned that even Astro Boy would be smashed into pieces, let alone a human body. Rinpoche had a deep understanding of the Empress's strength. She was definitely at the level of a Tyrannosaurus in human form. He did not know how she could be so powerful at her age. At the same time, he felt that it was a pity. That Long Wanli had a pretty good appearance. He was dressed in a green robe. Even though he could not see his face, he could feel that he was an elegant person just by looking at his back view. In particular, his sword was like a flying immortal. It was a pity that he was killed with a single slap. Now, even his corpse was buried under the plaza. "Why didn't you move the corpse to another place for burial?" Rinpoche asked. He felt awkward about burying corpses under the plaza. But burying the enemy's corpses under the ground will strengthen the fate of Dayo, Caretaker Shi said. He had to admit that this was the difference between the cultures of the two worlds. On Earth, if there were corpses buried under the ground, people would feel uncomfortable. But here, they felt that it could strengthen the fate of Dayo. This made Rinpoche speechless. "Will someone come to take revenge?" Rinpoche asked again. "Just bury them together." Caretaker Shi laughed mischievously. He was completely unconcerned about Rinpoche's question. Not long after the two of them returned to the Beast Park, Rinpoche was summoned to the palace. The person who came to summon him was an acquaintance, Shi. He had met him a few times before. "I want to present this to Her Majesty," Rinpoche said as he patted the air cooler. "What is this?" Shi was puzzled. Rinpoche pulled the cord of the air cooler. As the fan rotated, wind immediately blew out. Shi looked at it curiously and said, "It's much more convenient than using a fan." "Naturally," Rinpoche replied. Even though this thing wasn't very advanced and wasn't complicated to make, it was a new and interesting way of thinking that the ancients didn't have. Furthermore, the wind was natural, and the duration of the air cooler was much better than using a fan. Rinpoche carried the air cooler and followed Shi into the palace. They went straight to the imperial kitchen. "I'll go back and report to Her Majesty. She might summon you later," Shi said to Rinpoche before leaving. "Thank you." Rinpoche smiled. After entering the imperial kitchen, Rinpoche placed the air cooler at one side. A few cooks saw something novel and wanted to study it. However, they were all kicked away by Rinpoche. Everyone laughed and didn't seem to mind. Even though the people of Dayo had violent tendencies, they were rather straightforward after acknowledging him. They didn't mind some jokes. This made Rinpoche feel that they were pretty good. They were much easier to deal with than the people of the modern world. Even though they had only interacted a few times, after taking out those seasonings and making a few new dishes, the cooks in the imperial kitchen had acknowledged Rinpoche wholeheartedly. If not for Her Majesty saying that she had other arrangements for Renbachien, Caretaker Go would have wanted to transfer him to the imperial kitchen. Braised dragon scale fish. Renbachien was sure that this was a carp with 2 extra whiskers. After it was done, Renbachien tasted it. There wasn't any fishy smell at all. It melted in his mouth and was fresh and fragrant. He made up his mind to go to the market to buy a few more. Even if it was expensive, the taste was worth it. Sweet and sour pork, mushu pork, and white fungus soup. After finishing the 4 dishes, Renbachien went to take a rest. Even though the cooks in the imperial kitchen were in charge of making the dishes and he was in charge of mouthing them. Not long after the dishes were served, Who came to the imperial kitchen to look for Renbachien. Her Majesty summons you in. Bring your box. Chapter 54. Me, that's a good thing. It means it's going to be popular. I didn't expect my book review section to be flooded one day. I'm a little excited just thinking about it. Once it's popular, I can get a new wife. Everyone knows that people don't necessarily say anything when they're in a daze. Especially when I wrote an old book until 4 in the morning and only slept for 3 hours. Chapter 55. Renbachien carried the box into the main hall. The Empress was wearing a red muslin dress with a white undergarment underneath. Her hair was simply tied up at the back of her head and she was concentrating on her dinner. It was as if she did not see Renbachien coming in. Renbachien could only stand there and wait with the box in his arms. After the incident in the afternoon, Renbachien's impression of the Empress changed greatly when he saw her again. Previously, he only felt that this Empress was of noble status. Even though she could send a polar bear flying with a slap, Renbachien was rather surprised. However, after seeing the brute force of the Dayo people, Renbachien was somewhat used to it. But today, after that so-called expert who came out of nowhere to challenge him, the Empress had already risen to the level of a humanoid Tyrannosaurus in his heart, second only to a Super Saiyan. Today, Renbachien obediently stood there with his head lowered. He did not even lift his head and stared at the box as he entered the main hall. This box looked much more beautiful under the illumination of the lanterns. The galaxy on the box was glowing with starlight. After the Empress finished her dinner, she said, "Today's dinner dishes are not bad. Cook the same dishes tomorrow." Her voice was cold. "Yes." Caretaker Go bowed and took away the dinner. "Come up. Why are you so well behaved today?" The Empress's cold voice sounded. Previously, even though he clearly knew that the Empress was in front of him, even though he clearly knew that accompanying a monarch was like accompanying a tiger, but since he came from the real world, Renbachien still had many habits that were hard to change, such as looking around and so on. Usually, when he was telling a story, as the story progressed, he would often make all kinds of hand gestures, which made the Empress feel rather amused. Dayo itself did not pay much attention to etiquette, so she did not feel that he was being rude. Therefore, when she saw him looking downwards and being so well behaved today, the Empress felt that it was a little strange. Renbachien hurriedly said, "I was just thinking that your Majesty's martial arts are matchless and your might is world-shaking. Today, this kind of rascal actually dared to challenge your Majesty. He is really overestimating himself. He came all the way to Dayo just to let your Majesty display your exceptional martial arts to deter the rascal. At the same time, he can relax from handling state affairs and worrying about the people. From this point of view, he has succeeded and is considered to have made a contribution to Dayo. I wonder if his contributions to Dayo should be recorded in the annals of history." Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, who were behind the Empress, covered their mouths and giggled softly. They looked at Renbachien with interest. Not only did he know how to tell stories, but he was also very funny when he spoke. The corner of the Empress's mouth curled up slightly, but she immediately retracted it. Renbachien guessed that she should be in a good mood at this moment. It seemed that ever since his previous attempt at bootlicking failed miserably, his painstaking research had finally yielded some results. He felt slightly proud of himself. He still had some potential in this area. Following which, he carried the box and walked to the bottom of the stone steps. The Empress raised her head and saw the dark blue box that was decorated with galaxies. She was very interested and asked, "Is this what you want to present to me? What is it?" At the mention of the box in his hands, Rinpoche became more spirited. He raised his head and said, "This is an air cooler." The weather was scorching hot now. Ordinary people were like this, not to mention the Empress, who was in the palace handling the affairs of Dayo every day and working hard for the welfare of millions of people. After much consideration, I specially made this air cooler to present to your Majesty. Following which, he took 2 steps forward and placed the box not far from the Empress. He said, "Your Majesty, I have been impolite. I still need some crushed ice and half a basin of water." "Qing Yuan, Hong Wan," the Empress called out softly. Immediately, the maid from before nodded at Rinpoche and went to fetch the water. Another maid then placed the basin of ice beside Rinpoche's hand. Rinpoche opened the lid, added the ice and water in succession, and then covered the lid. After a while, he reckoned that the ice water should have soaked through the cloth. He directly pulled the string on top of the fan. Immediately, the cold air was blown to the Empress's body along with the wind. The Empress let out a soft cry of surprise. She took 2 steps forward with great interest. Feeling the cold wind blowing on her body, she squinted her eyes, which appeared somewhat long and narrow. She had a satisfied look on her face. At this moment, her expression didn't make her look so heroic. After squinting her long and narrow eyes, she looked a little more gentle and charming. Her entire person looked beautiful and alluring. However, this was only for a moment. The Empress took a few steps forward again. She was separated from Rinpoche by a box. Rinpoche could even smell the fragrance coming from her body. His mind was slightly stirred, and he immediately restrained his mind. Rinpoche felt that he was about to become an old monk sitting still. The Empress opened the lid and looked at the structure inside. Then, she turned around and returned to the couch with a trace of a rare gentle smile on her face. "If you put this thing a little further in, it would be rather cool to use. You are very considerate. Thank you for your praise, Your Majesty." Rinpoche lowered his head. "Well, continue with your story," the Empress said while lying on the couch. "Yes." Rinpoche began to narrate the story while the Empress listened attentively while lying on the couch. As Rinpoche narrated the story, the Empress didn't have any expression. However, the eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Wan lit up. Obviously, both of them were extremely interested in this story. Their mood also fluctuated along with the fate of each character in the story. After listening for a long time, the Empress waved her hand and asked, "Is there any other story?" After all, from her point of view, all those schemes and stratagems were nothing more than a sword. Those so-called valiant generals were equivalent to the ordinary soldiers of Dayo. It was just like listening to a group of ants fighting. At first, it was still somewhat fresh, but after a few days, it became somewhat boring. Hearing what the Empress said, the 2 maids were slightly disappointed. Both of them felt that this story was pretty good. Rinpoche wasn't engrossed in his storytelling today. He had been paying attention to the Empress. Seeing that she waved her hand, he immediately stopped and nodded his head in agreement. "Since it's like this, let me tell Your Majesty about the investiture of the gods," Rinpoche said. Originally, he wanted to talk about the journey to the west, but there were too many things that needed to be explained. It would be better to talk about the investiture of the gods first, and then follow up with the journey to the west. "What is it about?" the Empress asked. "It's about the ancient investiture of the gods," Rinpoche replied. He thought that the martial arts level of the investiture of the gods was definitely high enough. The Empress was rather interested and said, "Oh, then let's talk about this." Rinpoche opened his mouth and started from Pangu's creation of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors to give the Empress an idea. When he talked about how Su Hu rebelled against the Shang dynasty because he wanted him to offer his daughter, the Empress faintly sighed and said, "Exactly. Wasn't the founding of Dayo because of this?" These words made Rinpoche slightly stunned. He really wasn't clear about what happened before the founding of Dayo. He only knew from Caretaker Shir's words that Dayo was originally made up of aboriginals and was founded 70 years ago. He wasn't clear about the specifics. He wasn't sure if it was because she was reminiscing about the past, but the Empress listened even more attentively. This investiture of the gods was much more interesting to her than the romance of the three kingdoms. Especially after Zheng Luan's two beams of white light that sucked people's souls, Chong Heihu's vision blurred, and he fell off his horse and was captured by Zheng Luan. This kind of story was extremely interesting to the Empress. She said, "These things in China are rather similar to Great Xia. It is said that there are also strange people in Great Xia, but they are rarely seen." Furthermore, China and Great Xia sound similar. Ren Baqian hurriedly said, "China is millions of miles away from Deyo, it's just a coincidence of the names." The Empress nodded her head in agreement and continued listening to the story. In the end, after hearing Ji Chang's persuasion and Su Hu's agreement to gift his daughter, she immediately raised her eyebrows and slapped the back of the couch. Immediately, wood splinters flew everywhere and the back of the couch was smashed into pieces by her slap. This Ji Chang's words are better than his singing. First, Su Hu rebelled, then he wanted to gift his daughter. He's neither a minister nor a father, he's hesitant and fickle. Rinpochian shrunk his neck. This investiture of the gods wasn't written by him, so he couldn't be blamed. He didn't expect her to have such a big reaction when she heard this part. Combined with what the Empress said about Su Hu rebelling against the Shang dynasty, Rinpochian felt that there might be a connection. Presumably, it was related to the reason why the first emperor of Deyo revolted. Chapter 56. Rinpochian listened to a portion of Romance of the Three Kingdoms and 3 chapters of Investiture of the Gods. The sky was already dark by then. Before leaving the palace, Rinpochian hesitated whether he should tell the Empress about the salt well. However, after thinking about it, he was only 50% confident. If he messed it up, it might affect his value in the Empress's heart. In the end, he decided that it would be better to wait until his position was higher before using this method to exchange for credit. If he did it after the sweet potatoes were ripe, even if he failed, the impact wouldn't be too great. Rinpochian returned to the Beast Park, found some mutton to eat, and went to bed. The next morning, he took his camera and walked around the Beast Park, taking pictures of all the beautiful places. He didn't dare to take pictures of the animals in the Beast Park. After all, many of them were different from those on Earth. If he took pictures and uploaded them on the internet, it would be too easy to expose himself. Rinpochian's current situation was that he had to hide his abilities even if he wanted to show off. Thinking about what the Empress said last night, Rinpochian was suddenly interested in the history of Deyo. He went to ask Ting Hulu and Tai Dao. The two of them were guarding a few big wooden basins and resting in a cool place. The basins were filled with animal hides that were being soaked. After hearing Rinpochian's inquiry, the two of them told him some of the things they knew. Rinpochian knew that most of the people in Deyo were originally Aboriginals. 70 years ago, the Deyo people that Rinpochian saw now were actually Aboriginals, but they were called barbarians by the outside world. They mainly lived in villages scattered in the 60,000 mountains in the west and south of Deyo and made a living by hunting. It was a vast and continuous mountain range that surrounded the west and most of the south of the current Deyo nation. There were countless ferocious beasts and many Aboriginal strongholds in the mountain range. There was originally a country on this plain called the Hao Nation. At that time, the Hao Nation had been founded for more than 300 years and was extravagant. The king of the Hao Nation was as licentious as King Zhou of Shang. The Aboriginal women were usually strong and had outstanding looks. They were completely different from the weak women of the Hao Nation and had a unique flavor. The Hao Nation's emperor listened to someone and ordered the Aboriginals to offer up 100 women. Otherwise, he would send troops to attack. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were not under the jurisdiction of the Hao Nation. Furthermore, with their bad tempers, they naturally did not care about this matter. They even beat the messenger half dead and threw him down the mountain. The emperor of the Hao Nation was enraged when he received the report and immediately sent out 50,000 troops to suppress them. He also gave the order to annihilate the village and to send the young women back to the capital for him to enjoy. The Aboriginals were organized in strongholds, and they didn't have much defense either. 5 strongholds were destroyed on the spot, and the people in the strongholds were all slaughtered while the women were taken away. Furthermore, the Han nation's army was still advancing into the forest. It was only at this time that the Aboriginals reacted. Their anger spread like wildfire in the mountain range. The Aboriginals who heard the news gathered together. However, there wasn't enough time, and the number of people who could gather wasn't too many. Relying on the special characteristics of the mountain forest, they set up layers of interception. After the Han nation's army broke through the 3rd layer, they were stopped by the 4th layer and could not advance any further. Both sides had suffered great losses. Although the individual strength of the barbarians was strong, they had lost thousands of people in the face of an army of 50,000. The Han nation's army wasn't used to fighting in the forest, so their losses were even greater. Almost 10,000 of them were buried in the forest. At this time, the person who persuaded the Han nation's emperor to conscript the women once again gave him a plan. Why did the Aboriginals dare to disobey the Han nation's emperor? It was because the barbarians hunted, wore animal skins, and picked wild fruits for a living. They didn't need anything from the outside world and could live freely in the forest. The Han nation couldn't send out troops to suppress them. Otherwise, the situation would be the same as now. If the Han nation wanted the barbarians to submit, they had to make it impossible for them to survive in the forest. They had no choice but to obey the Han nation. There was an unknown number of barbarians in the mountain range, but there was one thing that all of them needed: salt. There was a piece of rock salt in the mountain range, and almost all the salt used by the Aboriginals came from there. As long as they poisoned the rock salt, the Aboriginals would have to listen to the Han nation's emperor if they wanted salt. It could be considered as subduing the enemy without a fight. The Han nation's emperor was overjoyed when he heard this and immediately carried out the plan. At the same time, he had another thought. Although the Han nation was strong against the Aboriginals, it was still weaker than the Yun nation and the Chin nation. If he could get the Aboriginals to join the army, it would be very effective in attacking cities and strongholds. In the end, the Aboriginals suffered heavy losses after the salt was poisoned. Half of the stronghold where Dayo nation's first emperor, Yapeng, lived was either dead or injured. After his grief, he immediately contacted the other strongholds to revolt. They bypassed the tens of thousands of soldiers in the forest and launched a sneak attack on a city near the mountain range. Now, both sides could be said to have a blood feud. At this time, a person came to seek refuge with Yapeng, saying that the Han nation's emperor destroyed his family and wanted revenge. At first, Yapeng sent people to watch over the other party and guard against him. Later on, when he saw that the other party was sincere in his plans and even destroyed the 40,000 soldiers, Yapeng began to trust him. At this time, the anger of the Aboriginals had subsided a little. After the 40,000 soldiers were destroyed, there was no longer a threat to their survival. However, the rock salt was poisonous and could only be obtained by plundering cities. Therefore, all the strongholds had to unite and plunder. It had to be said that this was the Han nation's emperor's doing. The Aboriginals' losses also started to increase. At this time, that person gave advice to Yapeng. He said that this couldn't go on. They couldn't always rely on plundering to obtain salt. It was better to first occupy a few cities and hold them. Only then would they have the capital to negotiate and obtain salt from the Yun nation and the Chin nation. When Yapeng heard this, he agreed. He then contacted a few strongholds located in the depths of the mountain range. With that person as the military advisor, they went down the mountain to attack the strongholds and occupied 4 cities in a row. As the Han nation's 50,000 soldiers in the southwest had been completely annihilated, the remaining soldiers had to guard the east and north. At the same time, the Han nation's emperor was licentious and tyrannical. There was a rebellion in the region and they had to send troops to suppress it. Furthermore, the Han nation's emperor thought that the barbarians were only robbing some things and that the key was to quell the rebellion. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to these barbarians. As a result, these cities were captured without much effort. At this time, that military advisor spoke again. The Aboriginals' lives were in the hands of others. No matter who became the emperor, if the barbarians weren't exchanged for salt, the barbarians could only rebel again. This would never end. Furthermore, this was a great opportunity. The Han nation's upper echelons were corrupt, their army was weak, and there was chaos in the country. It was better to directly occupy the palace and behead the main culprit. This way, they could establish a nation and the descendants of the barbarians could live and work in peace and contentment. At that time, under this person's plan, the barbarians didn't suffer heavy losses regardless of whether it was annihilating the 40,000 soldiers or capturing the cities. The Aboriginals trusted him and were persuaded. The Aboriginals, who had never thought of this before, were tempted after hearing this idea. These days, they were envious of the prosperity they saw in the various cities. This person was also a strategist. Their current military strength was somewhat insufficient and they had to contact the Aboriginals in the depths of the mountain range. At the same time, if they attacked now, the Han nation's attention would be focused on them. It was better to occupy these cities first and pretend that they wouldn't attack anymore. Then, they could contact the merchants from the Yun nation and the Chin nation to exchange the resources in these cities for salt. This way, the Han nation's emperor would definitely let down his guard and eliminate the rebellion in the country first. After hearing this, Yipeng felt that this was a good idea. Although the barbarians in the depths of the 60,000 mountains had other ways to obtain salt and wouldn't be so easily persuaded, he still sent a few people to persuade them. The reality was just as he said. The Han nation's emperor didn't expect the Aboriginals to dare to plot against him and focused all his energy on suppressing the rebellion. Another 8 months passed. During this half a year, the Aboriginals stayed in these cities and didn't attack again. This made the Han nation's emperor feel relieved. The war in the country was getting more and more intense. He mobilized all the available troops to suppress the rebellion. Only a small portion of the troops guarded the north and east. At this moment, a large number of Aboriginal soldiers walked out from the depths of the mountains and met up with Yipeng and the others. Then, they set off for the imperial city. These Aboriginal soldiers from the depths of the mountain range were more powerful because of the harsh living environment and the presence of all kinds of ferocious beasts. During this period of time, they attacked the cities and waded through the rivers. Among them, the two most difficult passes were opened by people in the middle of the night. It turned out that the military counselor had already arranged people inside without anyone knowing. After 10 days, the barbarian army fought their way to the imperial city and finally executed the Han nation's emperor in public. Initially, Yipeng and the Aboriginals only wanted revenge and to plunder daily necessities. In the end, under the incitement of the military advisor, the Han nation was destroyed. When the Han nation's emperor saw the military advisor, he was extremely shocked. When he found out that the military advisor was the Aboriginals' military advisor, he became even crazier and shouted out everything. At this moment, everyone realized that the person who provoked the Han nation's emperor to demand 100 women from the Aboriginals and poison the stone salt was this military advisor. The military advisor didn't stop or defend himself and allowed the Han nation's emperor to reveal everything. After the Han nation's emperor finished speaking, he revealed another piece of shocking news. He was the one who arranged a few of the rebellions in the Han nation. He was also in contact with the other rebel armies. His goal was to destroy the Han nation. He had planned all of this for a total of 15 years. In addition to the 2 years of military campaigns, he had planned for a total of 17 years. At this moment, it could be said that everyone was fooled by him, including the Han nation's emperor, the Aboriginals, and even the rebel armies. Chapter 57. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat as he listened to the story. He recalled how heroic the military advisor was back then. He single-handedly destroyed an entire nation and toyed with the troops of several parties. Such a person was indeed admirable. What happened next? Rinpoche asked. He really wanted to know what happened to the military advisor. Such a powerful person would definitely have arranged a way out for himself, right? Also, why did the military advisor do all these things? Later on, after the military advisor told everyone everything, he smiled and committed suicide by consuming poison in the face of everyone's anger. After his death, Yapeng found a few pieces of paper in his room. The paper included the arrangements for what happened after that and the reason why he did all these things. Renbaqian did not expect such an ending. That person actually committed suicide by consuming poison in the end. However, some people said that they saw him somewhere else. He faked his death that day. Who knows? Tai Dao shrugged his shoulders. Renbaqian was more convinced of this ending. How could a person with such a plan die just like that? Perhaps he really faked his death to escape and wandered the world incognito. Caretaker Ren, do you know why Her Majesty's surname is Qi? Teng Hulu laughed. Renbaqian knew that Teng Hulu must have a reason for asking this question. Combining it with the previous story, he suddenly had an idea. Could it be that person's surname is Qi? After the death of his family, the late emperor had no more worries. He did not expect to become the emperor one day. After the death of the military advisor, he changed his surname to Qi. Some people said that the late emperor changed his surname after reading the contents of the paper. What was written on the paper? Renbaqian asked curiously. He had always wanted to know why that person would do such a thing and even lose his life in the end. It could not be because he was a noble, pure, moral person, a person who was free from vulgar interests, and a person who was beneficial to the people. His entire life's plan was for the rise of the Aboriginals and the establishment of Dayo, right? I don't know. Perhaps only Her Majesty knows now. Teng Hulu shook his head and said, some people say that he is a mixed blood of the Hao Nation and my people. How do you know so much? Renbaqian asked curiously. Logically, these things should not be spread to everyone, right? My ancestor was in the army that year and even attacked the palace, Teng Hulu said. He told my grandfather, and my grandfather told me. Me too. Tai Dao nodded. What happened to the Hao Nation and the rebel soldiers? Renbaqian asked again. Some of them have fled to the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation and Great Xia, while the rest are living in the south, Teng Hulu said. They're in the south? Does it also belong to Dayo? Renbaqian asked curiously. In any case, everyone knew that he was an outsider and knew nothing about Dayo. There was no need for him to hide anything. If they were curious, they could just ask directly. The plains in the south near the 60,000 mountains are all Dayo aboriginals, and their numbers are about the same as the aboriginals of Dayo. Of course, they're from Dayo, but they're not content with their lot. At first, Teng Hulu was a little uncertain. Later on, when he mentioned that those people were restless, his eyes were filled with killing intent. Tai Dao, who was standing at the side, sneered. This was the first time Renbaqian saw such expressions on their faces. It seemed like there was a huge conflict between the Aboriginals and the Hao Nation in Dayo. However, thinking about it, no matter how licentious and tyrannical the Hao Nation's emperor was, he was still a civilized nation. No matter what, he would not be willing to let the entire nation be destroyed by the barbarians in the mountains. In the history of China, weren't there many people with lofty ideals who fought against the Qing and restored the Ming? From the bottom of his heart, Renbaqian more or less sympathized with those people from the Hao Nation. However, it seemed like he was on the same side as the Aboriginals and had even integrated into them. Renbaqian could only sympathize with them in his heart. This was also because they had the same history. He himself did not have any sense of identity with the Hao Nation. Both sides were very unfamiliar to him, but he was closer to the Aboriginals. Renbaqian calculated in his heart. There were 30 to 40 million people in Dayo, but he did not know if that included the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. After asking, he confirmed that it indeed included the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. In this case, there were only 10 to 20 million Aboriginals, and most of them were in the mountains. However, no one knew exactly how many Aboriginals there were in the 60,000 mountains. The 60,000 mountains were really too big. The deeper one went, the steeper it became. There were also more ferocious beasts, and they were all very powerful. Until now, no one had passed through the 60,000 mountains to see what the other side was like. Currently, the Aboriginals only included the Aboriginal strongholds deep in the mountains from which the troops were deployed. Renbaqian asked a few more questions, and both of them answered. Finally, Rinpoche had a certain understanding of the situation in Dayo. The original Hao Nation soldiers and the rebel army were defeated 3 times in the war with the Aboriginals, and the rebel army was almost completely wiped out. If it weren't for the fact that the Aboriginals also suffered heavy losses, the restlessness of the other nations, and Great Xia directly dispatched troops to occupy a few border cities, the Aboriginals would probably have wiped them all out. Under such circumstances, both sides took a step back. The rebel army and the majority of the Hao Nation soldiers in the south were similar to an autonomous system. This was arranged according to the last contents of the paper left by the military advisor. They could have a small number of troops, and the Hao Nation soldiers would govern the Hao Nation internally. However, the largest area they could control was the area of a city. A small number of troops could be maintained in the city, but the number of troops and equipment were considerably limited. In addition, the Aboriginals were superior to them in other aspects and weren't strict. On the whole, Dayo still maintained the simplicity of the Aboriginals and wasn't harsh on the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. In fact, other than the monarch of the Hao Nation, they didn't have any resentment towards the ordinary people. As such, the overall situation was that the Aboriginals would govern themselves, don't cause trouble, and don't play any tricks. The Aboriginals couldn't be bothered to deal with them. If anything happened, the Aboriginals would immediately arrive. Even so, there were still people who didn't give up and would occasionally play tricks. In addition to the blood feud from the previous few wars, the conflict had become more and more intense over the years. Of course, the most important point was that there weren't any remnant citizens of the Hao Nation in the imperial court of Dayo. The highest position a remnant citizen of the Hao Nation could achieve was to become the lord of a city and guard that small piece of land. The remnant citizens of the Hao Nation rarely lived in other places. Both parties didn't integrate at all, and it seemed like the Aboriginals didn't have any intention of integrating the other party into their own. This was also one of the reasons why they weren't content with their lot. After all, there would always be people with ambitions and aspirations. Being the lord of a city wasn't enough to satisfy them. After all, the lord of a city was still in that small piece of land, and there would always be people who wanted a bigger sky. However, these weren't things that Rinpoche needed to worry about. From these past events, Rinpoche could roughly guess why the Empress had such a big reaction after hearing about the investiture of the gods. There were many aspects that were very similar to what the Aboriginals had experienced. As the 3 of them sat and chatted, 3 burly men dressed as imperial guards walked over from a distance. The one in front was Sherhu. When Rinpoche saw them, he stood up and was about to welcome them when he heard Sherhu say, "Rinpoche, receive the imperial edict." Rinpoche was dumbfounded when he heard this. He completely didn't know what to do. Should he kneel on one knee, or both knees, or receive the edict while standing? He had no experience at all. Caretaker Ren, kneel on one knee and receive the edict. Sherhu knew Rinpoche's situation and reminded him in a soft voice. Rinpoche quickly did as he was told. Sherhu then unrolled a scroll that was black on the sides and white in the middle. The imperial edict of the Dayo Emperor declares that Rinpoche is a storyteller for Qingshin Palace Hall. Rinpoche was at a loss after hearing this. What was going on with storytelling in Qingshin Palace Hall? Could it be that there was an official who was responsible for telling stories to the emperor? Caretaker Ren, why aren't you receiving the imperial edict? Sherhu whispered. Your subject, receive the imperial edict. Rinpoche quickly raised both of his hands, just like how it was shown on television. After receiving the scroll, Rinpoche's mind was still in a daze. He didn't know what exactly was going on. He had definitely been promoted. Previously, he was still a nobody. Now, he could receive the imperial edict. This was definitely a promotion. Then what was he going to do? Where was he going to stay? Sir Ren, congratulations. Sherhu cupped his fists and said, Brother Sher, please don't call me sir. Just call me Brother Ren. Rinpoche pulled Sherhu to one side and asked, Brother Sher, what kind of official position is this? Sherhu shook his head with a strange expression and replied, I don't know. Chapter 58. It's written on the edict. Shi pointed at the edict. Renbaqian opened the edict. There were dozens of words on it, but he couldn't recognize any of them. He remembered that Shi didn't say more than 20 words when he read the edict. There were at least 40 to 50 words on the edict. What does it say? Before Renbaqian came here, he never thought he would be illiterate. His English had passed level 4, and he could even understand a few words of Japanese, yamit. I don't know. Shi looked serious and reliable. However, Renbaqian was dumbfounded after hearing his words. You don't know? Renbaqian almost shouted. I can't read. Shi said matter-of-factly. Renbaqian opened his mouth wide and his tonsils almost popped out. Although he didn't know what his official position was, Caretaker Go of the Imperial Kitchen respected him a lot since he often came out to summon Renbaqian to the palace hall. With this kind of status, it would be considered low to call him a palace guard. Furthermore, the two soldiers just now obviously treated him as their leader. How could such a person be illiterate? Then what you said just now, it was dictated by Her Majesty, Shi said solemnly. Brother Shi, what do you know? Renbaqian's face twitched for a long time. From what Her Majesty said just now, Brother Ren, your official position is from Great Xia. This is the first time in Dayo that it's a reward. It's considered a secondary class, rank 8, and you receive a salary from the palace. Shi finally knew something. He felt a little embarrassed after saying that he didn't know anything. Then what do I have to do? Where do I stay? Renbaqian was still at a loss. His current residence was in the Beast Park. If he couldn't stay in the Beast Park in the future, where would he stay? Furthermore, without Teng Hulu and Tai Dao, even with the electric baton, he didn't feel very safe. Her Majesty did say that because you have other responsibilities, you will stay in the Beast Park and wait at Qingxin Palace Hall every afternoon. Where is Qingxin Palace Hall? Renbaqian asked. It's the place where the palace books are kept. Here is a token. Hand it to the palace guards at noon and someone will bring you there. Shi took out a token from his waist. Don't lose it. You'll need this token to enter and leave the palace. Renbaqian stretched out his hand to catch it. It wasn't a big plate, but it was very heavy and cold to the touch. He didn't know what kind of metal it was made of, but its surface was suffused with a silver glow. In any case, the fact that they were still staying in the Beast Park made Renbaqian feel more at ease. He was more familiar with this place and felt more secure here. It was just that he didn't have much time to go out in the future. Also, he would disappear once every 3 days. Even though the Empress knew about it and said that she wouldn't pursue the matter, he still felt that it was somewhat dangerous. It seemed like he still had to show his worth, lest the Empress suddenly couldn't find him and beheaded him in a bad mood. Thank you, Brother Shi. Please wait for me for a while. Renbaqian cupped his hands in obeisance and thanked Shi. Then, he ran into the house and grabbed a handful of silver. Back then, he had used a saw blade to cut off the large ingots of silver, and now he only had this kind of broken silver. According to what was said on TV, at this time, it was necessary to bribe the person who came to announce the decree with money. From the perspective of human relations, it would not be a loss to offer him a handful of silver. Brother Ren is a quick-witted person. I won't stand on ceremony, I will look for you for a drink another day. Shi laughed heartily and patted Renbaqian's shoulder. Then, he stuffed the handful of silver to the 2 imperial guards behind him and said, This is from Brother Ren. Take it back and drink with you. Thank you, Sir Ren. The 2 imperial guards received the silver and laughed. They looked at Renbaqian with a gaze full of goodwill. It seemed like no matter where, money could do a lot of things. Of course, Shi's reputation was also involved in this. I shall not stay any longer, I still have to report back. Shi, who cupped his hands in obeisance to Renbaqian, turned around and left with the 2 imperial guards. After Shi left, Teng Hulu and Tai Dao went forward to congratulate Renbaqian. Congratulations, Caretaker Ren. From now on, you will have to call you Sir Ren. Renbaqian touched the token. Until now, he still felt that it was a little unreal. He had risen from a mediocre official to a secondary class, rank 8 official just like that? His rank was even higher than Caretaker Shi's. However, Rinpochian obviously had an official position and was receiving a salary. His authority was much lower than caretaker Shi's. In any case, he was still an official. Previously, he had told stories for so many days and did not mention that he would be rewarded. Yet, he was rewarded today. He did not know if it was because of the air cooler or his bootlicking skills. It was more likely that there were various reasons. Rinpochian returned to his room and took out 2 ingots of silver and threw them to the two. Happy to see this. The two of them grabbed the silver and laughed. Sir Ren's official robe has not been delivered yet. You still have to go to the palace in the afternoon. I reckon it will be delivered before noon, Teng Hulu said. Rinpochian nodded. He had forgotten to ask about this matter just now. He was still inexperienced. He then asked curiously, what is the official position of that Shi who announced the imperial edict? He is a palace guard, but it seems like he will be promoted soon, Teng Hulu said. He then added, the palace guards are secondary class, rank 5. They are the most elite warriors who are good at fighting. However, they only have ranks and no official positions. They are different from people like Sir Ren. Not long after, caretaker Shi heard the news and rushed over. He cupped his fists and greeted Rinpochian, greetings, Sir Ren. Caretaker Shi, don't give me the cold shoulder, Rinpochian hurriedly said. Just call me Brother Ren. That won't do. Now that your official position is higher than mine, I still have to address you as I should. Caretaker Shi laughed heartily. Sir Ren is having a joyous occasion today. Later, get the kitchen to prepare a few tables so that everyone can bask in the joyous atmosphere. Tai Dao and Teng Hulu immediately went to inform caretaker Shi. Alright, there is no one else. Brother Shi, just call me Brother Ren. This official position is a reward. It is much worse than yours, Rinpochian said. In that case, I will still call you Brother Ren in the future. Shi who patted Rinpochian's shoulder. He almost slapped Rinpochian into the ground. Rinpochian's entire body immediately fell askew. Rinpochian reckoned that his shoulder would swell up after this slap. Oh yes, caretaker Shi, I am afraid I can no longer take up my position in the Beast Park. In the future, I will hand over the ice cellar to caretaker Shi. As for those people, I will make arrangements for the ice cellar. Those 3 people in charge of the ice cellar will stay there. Out of the other 7, 5 will follow you. After all, there are still a few acres of land. I will arrange for the other 2 to do other things, caretaker Shi immediately said. In that case, many thanks. Leave Teng Hulu and Tai Dao with me, Rinpochian smiled. He was already familiar with Teng Hulu and Tai Dao. Rinpochian still had some messy jobs that he had to hand over to the 2 of them to do. For example, skin tanning. He was even preparing to make a sofa. Rinpochian touched the so-called imperial edict in his hand and asked tentatively without any expectations, caretaker Shi, can you read? Chapter 59. Rinpochian had to admit that the basic quality of education in Dayo was indeed worrying. In any case, it had already been 70 years since the founding of Dayo. Not many people were literate. Take a look at China. Before the founding of the People's Republic, the literacy rate was not high. 70 years later, although not everyone was literate, it was almost the same. In any case, caretaker Shi was the chief caretaker of the Beast Park. He was a rank 9 martial artist and had dozens of subordinates. Including his family members, there were more than 100 of them. Can't even read? And that Shi who just now was a secondary class 5 imperial bodyguard who was illiterate. Rinpochian was really doubtful about how they were going to convey documents and orders. They couldn't possibly just rely on oral instructions, right? When it was almost noon, 2 people from the palace came to deliver Rinpochian's official robes. It was a set of clothes that was mainly black with a red collar and cuffs. There was even a bird pattern on it. The material was much softer than what Rinpochian was wearing now. Furthermore, it felt smooth and felt like silk. The style was not that of ancient Chinese robes with big sleeves. Although the clothes were longer, reaching the knees, the sleeves were only slightly wider than ordinary clothes. After Rinpochian changed into it, he couldn't see whether it looked good or not. However, the breathability and comfort were much better than before. The only thing that made him feel a little uncomfortable was that he was a little fat. The people of Dayo were all tall and sturdy. Their arms were strong enough to run a horse. Compared to them, Rinpoche's physique was more than an order of magnitude lower. The clothes he wore made him look a little fat. Caretaker Sher was stunned when he saw Rinpoche come out after changing his clothes. Soon after, he burst out laughing. Rinpoche got goosebumps from his laughter. He didn't think he was wearing the wrong clothes, right? Look for me tonight, I'll get someone to help you change it. Caretaker Sher laughed heartily. Rinpoche gestured at his baggy official robe and roughly knew why Caretaker Sher laughed. If he were to wear such big clothes, he would probably look like a monkey wearing a robe. However, he had to go to Qingshin Palace Hall at noon. It seemed like he could only change it after he returned. They had lunch as a form of celebration for Rinpoche. Although that was the case, the food was no different from usual. The only difference was that there were more spices, which made the food more fragrant. The banquet was lively. Even though Rinpoche hadn't stayed here for a long time, he was beginning to integrate into the culture. Seeing the sincere congratulatory smiles on everyone's faces, he felt a surge of warmth in his heart. These people were really too cute. Rinpoche, who was still sighing just a second ago, immediately grabbed the stool to cover his chest and shouted, "Who's using their dirty claws to slap me again?" His face was filled with the words, "If you dare slap me with your oily claws again, I'll smash your face with a stool." After the meal, Rinpoche cupped his hands at everyone and entered the palace with a body full of claw marks. There was nothing he could do about it. He only had one set of official robes, and he didn't even have a change of clothes. Time was up. Rinpoche clenched his teeth and left. Fortunately, the greasy claw print on the black robe was a little more conspicuous under the sunlight. If it was inside the hall, one would not be able to see it without looking carefully. He passed the token to the palace gate guards for inspection. The two of them asked him to wait for a while. One of them took the token and went in for 2 or 3 minutes before coming out empty-handed. Then, the two of them and Rinpoche stared at each other as they waited. The two of them looked at Rinpoche, who was wearing an oversized official robe and had a body full of shiny, greasy claw marks. Their faces twitched. If they didn't know that they were the face of the palace and needed to maintain their manners, they would probably be lying there laughing. Anyway, Rinpoche couldn't see what he looked like, so he let them be. This robe was still quite comfortable. After waiting for a while, a female official in her 30s or 40s hurried out. She looked at Rinpoche and almost spurted out her saliva. "Follow me." That female official threw the token back to Rinpoche and said while holding back her laughter. Just as Rinpoche entered the door, he heard 2 people laughing behind him. "Shouldn't you at least wait for me to walk further away before laughing? Otherwise, why did you endure for so long just now? All I have to do is turn my back on him, right?" Just now, he directly stood with his back facing them, and they wouldn't have to endure for so long. "How should I address you, sir?" Rinpoche followed behind and asked cautiously. He didn't know the identity of the person in front of him, but he was an official bestowed by the Empress. He was afraid that he would have to enter the palace frequently in the future. It was better to maintain a good relationship no matter what. "Don't call me sir, call me Keeper Sher. Keeper is my position." Keeper Sher turned around and glanced at Rinpoche. "I understand." Rinpoche nodded his head. It seemed like Keeper Sher was really a big surname. Not knowing the other party's temperament, Rinpoche didn't dare to say much. The two of them walked in silence for a while and arrived in front of a palace. Keeper Sher stopped, turned around and said, "This is the place. You can enter with the token." "Thank you." Rinpoche cupped his hands and walked into the palace hall. This palace hall was about 2 stories high. It looked rather tall and occupied a large area. After pushing open the door and entering the palace hall, Rinpoche saw a 16 or 17-year-old girl sitting behind a table. She was wearing the same clothes as the female official just now, and she was holding a paper book. She was reading very seriously. If it wasn't for the fact that she was drooling, Rinpoche felt that she was a talent to be able to sit there with that book in her hand and sleep so soundly. She didn't even know that he had pushed open the door and entered. What made Rinpoche even more astonished was that she could actually become a female official at such a young age. Rinpoche saw that she was sleeping soundly and didn't disturb her. After taking a closer look, this female official was quite good-looking. Compared to the common Dayo women, she gave off a warm and fragrant vibe. He wasn't sure if it was because she didn't spend much time under the sun, but her skin was fairer. Furthermore, she didn't have that heroic and wild aura between her brows. After which, Rinpoche sized up the palace hall again. He saw that there were rows of rooms in the palace hall. The place where he was standing now was a passageway. However, the passageway was wider and was at least 3 meters wide. The rooms on both sides were made of hollow wood. He could see that there were many scrolls and books on the shelves inside. Some were made of animal skin and some were made of paper. Rinpoche reckoned that they were all books. In that case, this should be the book vault. After sizing up the place, Rinpoche had nothing to do. He leaned against the wall and stared blankly. After an unknown period of time, the book in the lady's hand fell to the ground with a thud. The lady woke up with a start. She hurriedly wiped her drool and bent over to pick up the book. She heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she was the only one who saw it. Then she saw a man looking at her with a kind smile. Ah! The girl's eyes suddenly widened like a frightened cat. Rinpoche hurriedly put down the token in his hand and showed it to her. I'm new here today. I remember now. The lady suddenly realized and then hammered her own head. I forgot about this. You are the new storyteller of Qingshin Palace Hall, right? The lady said. Following which, she raised her head and said, Why didn't you greet me when you came in? It seemed like she was angry that someone saw her drooling while she was sleeping. Seeing that you were sleeping soundly, I didn't have the nerve to greet you. Rinpoche laughed. The lady fiercely glared at him. Chapter 60. Seeing that the other party didn't seem to want to talk to him, Rinpoche asked, May I know how to address you? The female official thought for a while and seemed to feel that she might have to see this man in front of her every day for a period of time, so she said, My name is Lin Xiaola. Call me Librarian Li Lin. Ancient books? This was equivalent to a librarian, right? As Rinpoche thought about it, he asked the question that he was concerned about. Greetings, Librarian Lin. May I know what I'm here for? I don't know. Just find a place to stay and don't disturb me. Wait for His Majesty to summon you into the palace hall, Lin Xiaola said casually. After hearing this, Rinpoche went to one side and stared blankly. After standing for a while, he got tired and sat on the ground. The ground inside seemed to be quite clean. Someone cleaned it every day, so there was not a speck of dust. Lin Xiaola ignored him and sat there reading. Not long after, Rinpoche noticed that her head was nodding bit by bit, and it looked like it was about to hit the table. Rinpoche was delighted to see her like this. This was the legendary, falling asleep as soon as she touched the book. The person in charge of the library was actually someone who slept with books every day. It was somewhat different from his impression. Boom. Rinpoche spat out his drink when he saw that she was leaning against the table with her face. Librarian Lin was too much fun. He could watch her sleep for an entire afternoon. Ah! Lin Xiaola covered her nose, and tears welled up in her eyes. When he realized that Rinpoche was staring at him, he scratched his head in frustration. Why can't I control my sleepiness? Someone saw him again. Her fine black hair instantly turned into a bird's nest, just like Mei Chao who had gone mad. What are you looking at? Haven't you seen people doze off before? Lin Xiaola was going crazy. Rinpoche held back his laughter, turned his head away, and silently added that there weren't many people who would use their faces to smash the table, especially when their faces were covered in saliva. After 3 to 4 minutes, Rinpoche reckoned that the other party had cleaned up. He turned his head and saw her pouting in a daze. When she realized that Rinpoche was looking at her, she immediately turned her head to the other side. The temperament of a little girl, Rinpoche thought to himself. Rinpoche was even more curious about how she managed to get her hands on the ancient books and records here. Librarian Lin, can you read? Renbachyan asked. Of course. Lin Xiaola raised her head like a proud hen. Can you teach me how to read? Renbachyan laughed. He didn't know how long he would have to travel between these two worlds. He couldn't possibly be illiterate forever, right? There were so many books here. After he learned the words here, he could look for some books to read. Maybe there would be something he was interested in. You can't read. Lin Xiaola widened her eyes in astonishment. The storyteller of Qingxin Palace Hall was actually illiterate? This was simply the biggest joke. Renbachyan spread his hands and said, I really can't read. Can you teach me? Lin Xiaola turned her head away again. Renbachyan chuckled. He reckoned that Lin Xiaola, who had the temperament of a little girl, was inexplicably resentful. Let's talk about it when she forgets about it. Anyway, this matter was not urgent. After staying there for about an hour, two maids came in with cleaning tools. They cupped their fists and greeted Lin Xiaola, Librarian Lin. It seemed like the common etiquette in Dayo was to cup one's fist in salute. Regardless of gender, they would only go down on one knee when they saw the emperor. Lin Xiaola kept a straight face and nodded at the two maids. The two of them looked at Renbachyan curiously and went in to clean up. Just as the two of them entered, an imperial guard came to the door and asked, Is the storyteller of Qingxin Palace Hall here? Yes, I am. Renbachyan immediately jumped up from the ground, patted the non-existent dust off his butt, and walked forward. Her Majesty is looking for you, the imperial guard said and led him out. Renbachyan initially thought that he would return to the palace hall, but after making a few detours, he realized that the route was not right. The sound of an unknown musical instrument could be heard from afar. The sound was desolate and distant, and it gave people the feeling that it was full of simplicity and nature, just like the name of the Aboriginals. Following the sound of this musical instrument, they finally arrived at a garden. The garden was filled with exotic flowers and plants that competed with each other in beauty. There were also some trees that weren't very tall. It wasn't as exquisite as the gardens in China. The flowers and plants here were a little messy, but it was full of vitality. A river that wasn't considered deep flowed through the garden, and there was a stone bridge over it. Not far from the stone bridge, the empress, who was dressed in red, was sitting in a pavilion. Beside her, there was a woman playing an unknown musical instrument. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were standing not far away. No matter where the empress was, she would always have these two people by her side. This made Renbachyan realize that he could offend anyone in the palace except for the empress and these two people. These two people were the so-called close officials. There were no eunuchs in Dayo's palace, only female officials, maids, and imperial guards. These two people were definitely the most trusted aides of the empress. Greetings, Your Majesty, Renbachyan said as he knelt on one knee near the empress. You are a fast learner. The empress shifted her gaze to Renbachyan, following which she was slightly stunned. Her eyebrows were raised at first, then slowly lowered. How did you get yourself into such a sorry state? The empress's cold voice sounded. I was careless in the afternoon. Please forgive me, Your Majesty, Renbachyan quickly replied. Even though Dayo doesn't place as much emphasis on style as Great Xia, but since you are now an official, you have to be more careful. If I see you in such a state again, you will definitely suffer. It was rare for the empress to say a few more words, but it made Renbachyan break out in a cold sweat. Yes, I know my mistake, Renbachyan quickly replied. In his heart, he was cursing those fellows in the Beast Park. If it wasn't for them, he wouldn't have ended up in such a state. The empress frowned slightly. Where did you learn to say this from? Renbachyan laughed dryly. He couldn't possibly say that he learned it from television, so he could only say, it's like this in China. Have you been an official in China before? The empress asked faintly. Renbachyan had never been a class monitor since he was young, let alone an official. In his heart, he was wondering if he should brag or something. In any case, there was no way to verify it. However, when he raised his head and saw the empress's cold eyes, he immediately became terrified. He swallowed the words that were at the tip of his tongue and shook his head. I have never been an official. He muttered in his heart. Her eyes were really too sharp. It was as if she could directly see through his heart. He didn't dare to lie even though he was already at the tip of his tongue. "Continue with your story," the Empress leaned back slightly and said. Rinpoche cleared his throat. Narrating the investiture of the gods with this bleak music gave him a special feeling. When he reached the part where the emperor wanted the minister to die, he didn't dare to not die. The Empress asked, "Is China like this?" Rinpoche thought for a while and carefully replied, "There's another saying in China, water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it." The Empress repeated this saying, pondered for a while, and nodded. That makes some sense. The emperor of a country should take care of his own people. If his people can't even eat, what's the use of being the emperor? Naturally, his people will rebel. He had to admit that the Empress was indeed very intelligent. Even though she had never heard of such words before, she could immediately understand the meaning behind it. Chapter 61. Thanks to Piss All Over 01, Tale of Dreams, Brother Hay of the Tujia family, and to the other readers who voted to comment in the book review and comment section. In fact, this book was prepared to be updated after it was published, but now that there are 3 branch chiefs, I have to express my gratitude. Thank you, everyone. The Empress waved her hand, stood up, and gazed into the distance in the pavilion. After a while, she said, "However, there are some people who will always have different ideas no matter how you treat them. What do you think we should do with such people?" Rinpoche thought to himself that the Empress wasn't talking about him, right? He didn't have any messy ideas. It sounded more like she was talking about the remnant citizens of the Hao nation. But what did the Empress mean by saying this? Was she testing him? The person in front of him could pinch him to death with one hand. This wasn't an adjective. Rinpoche had no choice but to be careful. He didn't want to be meritorious, but he wanted to avoid making mistakes. After sorting out his words, Rinpoche cautiously said, "I feel that we should assimilate them and let them have a sense of identity with their country. This way, some people may not be able to change and may have other ideas, especially those who are older. However, the new generation can identify with the country from a young age. After they grow up, the situation will change." After Rinpoche finished speaking, the Empress turned to face him without saying anything. He didn't know what she was thinking. Apart from the sound of the musical instrument, there was nothing else. Just when Rinpoche was wondering if what he said didn't suit her, the Empress turned around and said coldly, "If I say so, all of them will be beheaded." Although the Empress didn't do anything else, her expression and words still made Rinpoche feel cold and subconsciously shrunk his neck. The Empress sat back in her original position and said, "If it wasn't for the late emperor, I would have beheaded them. However, what you said is quite interesting. Tell me in detail." Rinpoche was now sure that the Empress was talking about the remnant citizens of the Hao nation. Although he didn't know why the Empress asked him, he still racked his brains and sorted out the things in his mind and listed them in 1, 2, 3, 4. To put it bluntly, it was the patriotism education. Regular lectures on patriotism, such as remembering the bitterness and sweetness of life, the 8 honors and 8 disgraces, would be lectured to them and required to memorize them. If there were conditions, it would be best to arrange for people to teach them in their private schools. They had to learn. At the same time, the culture and traditions of the Aboriginals were passed on to them, and the cultures of both sides merged. In the end, both sides lived together. Now, they were confined to a small circle and did not know much about the Aboriginals. Every day, they came into contact with the remnants of the Hao nation. Furthermore, the Aboriginals had destroyed the nation. In the long run, they would naturally be surrounded by resentment. If both parties were to live together, the other party would see that there was nothing wrong with the Aboriginals other than their strength. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were simple and honest. Naturally, they would be less prejudiced against them. After all, most of the people were simple and honest, no matter where they were. In reality, most of them were ambitious people. They were unwilling to accept the current situation, but they could not see the path to advancement. Naturally, they would have all kinds of ideas. If a certain number of official positions were opened up and they were allowed to enter the imperial court, in order to protect their own positions, they would suppress those who were disloyal. Step by step, this was patriotism education, division, and suppression. It was basically a method that had been used on Earth over and over again. The Empress quietly listened to what Rinpoche had to say. After he finished speaking, she remained silent for a long time before saying, "Continue with your story." Rinpoche could not read minds and naturally did not know what she was thinking. However, he guessed that she was probably considering the feasibility of this plan. Rinpoche felt that if she really wanted to do it, this plan was quite feasible. After all, it had already been proven on Earth. As long as it was adjusted according to the situation in Dayo, it would be fine. If this method did not work, Rinpoche had a more ruthless method. However, he was afraid that he would train a bunch of pyramid schemers. He now felt that he was like the henchman of the villain in a movie, helping to come up with all kinds of bad ideas. This was especially true for the remnants of the Hao nation. However, it was not without benefits for them. At the very least, they would be less scheming in private. This was to prevent the Empress in front of them from saying, "Behead," when she was in a bad mood. At that time, there would really be heads rolling. When Rinpoche continued to talk about how the demon fox transformed into Daji and entered the palace, the Empress was absent-minded. However, Qin Yuan and Hong Wan were engrossed in listening. When he talked about how Yun Zhongzi went down the mountain, the Empress then focused on the story. This kind of fairy tale was quite attractive to her. When he said, "If the emperor treats his subjects like brothers, then the subjects will treat the emperor like confidants. If the emperor treats his subjects like dirt, then the subjects will treat the emperor like bandits." The Empress was slightly enlightened. "These words of yours from China do make some sense." The Empress nodded. The principles of the world are interconnected. It is the same everywhere, Rinpoche said. That is not necessarily true. The Empress suddenly sneered. Rinpoche did not know if he had said something wrong. When Rinpoche talked about Fei Zhong's scheme to depose Empress Jiang, someone came to inform the Empress that it was time for dinner. "That's all for today. Go back and tidy up. Don't do this again tomorrow." The Empress stood up and said, "Yes." Rinpoche made up his mind to find someone to change his clothes and wash them quickly. "Your Majesty!" Rinpoche saw that the Empress was about to leave and quickly called out, "Is there anything else?" The Empress turned sideways and looked at him. "I would like to ask, what is my official position?" Rinpoche was a little embarrassed. "Just do what you are doing now," the Empress said. She then left with Qin Yuan and Hong Wan. The musician also started to pack his instruments. After the Empress left, Rinpoche smiled bitterly. It seemed like he was really a storyteller. However, this was also good. He still did not understand many aspects of Dayo. If he was asked to do something else, he would not be able to do it. This was not Earth. If he made any mistakes, he would at most be scolded or fined. Rinpoche followed the original route according to his memory and only found the way out of the palace when he was about to reach Qingxin Palace Hall. When he returned, he took off his clothes and found someone to change them. He lay on the bed and immediately felt a little tired. His mind was mostly thinking about the Empress's reaction at that time and guessing what she was thinking. Those remnant citizens of the Hao nation seemed to be very annoyed by the Empress. If not for the previous emperor's order, she would have killed them all. He did not know if his words could change the other party's mind and make her change her mind. After thinking about it, he felt that he had nothing better to do. He did not know what to do now. He had just become a storyteller in Qingxin Palace Hall and was actually worried about the life and death of 20 million people. These things should be left to the Empress and those people in the imperial court to consider. He should first learn the words here and read more books when he had nothing to do. He should understand the situation of this world first. Maslow's hierarchy of needs categorized human needs from low to high as physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, respect needs, and self-actualization needs. Chapter 62. The next morning, Rinpoche tried on the clothes that he had just washed and dried. It was not bad. Even though there was no mirror, he could feel that it fit his body. The one helping to change the clothes was the wife of an odd job worker. Her skills were quite good. After trying on the clothes, Rinpoche changed them so that those heartless fellows wouldn't leave claw marks all over his body. He didn't know when they would send him a change of official robes. Since he had nothing to do, he chatted with Teng Hulu and Tai Dao and listened to them talk about the military counselor. Rinpoche didn't chase after celebrities since kindergarten because it was too childish. Now, he worshipped the military counselor like a fan. He would even listen to stories about the military counselor with great interest. There were many intelligent people in history, and many of them were famous. However, there weren't many like him. It was a pity that the two of them didn't know his name. They only knew that his surname was Chi. It seemed that very few people mentioned his name at that time. As a result, not many people knew his name now. It was said that there was a portrait of him in the palace. It was drawn by an aboriginal who was very artistic. Rinpoche really wanted to see what it looked like when he had the chance. Thinking of the scrolls and books in Qingshin Palace Hall, Rinpoche felt that it was very likely there. After lunch, Rinpoche changed his clothes and strolled into the palace. He showed the token in front of the door and allowed him to enter. Rinpoche entered the palace and looked at the token in his hand. It seemed that the token was really useful. He could actually enter and exit the palace at will? A person of unknown origin like him could actually give this thing to him. However, thinking of the Empress's fighting strength, Rinpoche felt that she wouldn't put him in her eyes. Even if he stuffed a knife into his hand, he wouldn't be able to defend himself. Along the way to Qingshin Palace Hall, Rinpoche saw Lin Xiaola sitting on the stone steps in front of the door. She was supporting her chin with her hand and her eyes were squinted. Rinpoche couldn't figure out whether she was sleeping or not. Librarian Lin. Rinpoche walked over to her and greeted her. Seeing that she didn't respond, he shook his head and didn't disturb her anymore. He let her be immersed in her dream. When he entered Qingshin Palace Hall, he saw another book on the table. This time, it was a book made of animal hide. He didn't know how long it had been there, but it looked rather old. Rinpoche picked it up and flipped through it. There were only a few dozen words on each page, and each word was like a drawing. However, there were a few characters that were similar to Chinese characters, such as San, Ri, Yun, and Wang. He just didn't know if they had the same meaning. Interspersed in the middle were a few pictures of people performing various actions. Secret manuals of martial arts? Rinpoche immediately thought of this and immediately became excited. Even if he couldn't become an expert like the Empress, it would still be good if he could strengthen his body. He didn't need to give way to anyone he saw when he went out. It was really damaging to a man's dignity that anyone could beat 8 of him with one hand. It was a pity that he couldn't recognize the words on it. Many of the words looked similar, and he couldn't even remember them. After a while, Rinpoche helplessly placed the booklet back on the table. Looks like I'll have to wait until I learn how to read. When it was almost evening, Rinpoche was called into the hall to tell a story. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard the Empress's voice. "Are you going to disappear again tomorrow?" Rinpoche immediately broke out in a cold sweat. It was as if his body was petrified. He turned around with difficulty and forced a smile. "Your Majesty's eyes are like pearls, your foresight is like that of a deity, your wisdom is outstanding, your foresight is far-sighted, and you have the pearl of wisdom in your hands. I'm terrified and I'm in awe." "It's true that I'm terrified. As for the rest, it's hard to say," the Empress said coldly. "Forget it, I've said that as long as you do your best, I won't interfere. You may leave." After being beaten, Rinpoche escaped from the palace as if he had been pardoned. After leaving the palace, he heaved a sigh of relief and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. In just a short while, his back was drenched again. After going through the Empress's words in his mind, he was afraid that the words, "do my best," were what the Empress wanted to say. The matter of the salt well had to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. With the merits of the salt well and the sweet potatoes, his head would probably be more stable. Along the way, he lowered his head and walked while thinking. In the darkness, his head directly hit a wall and he took 2 steps back. When he looked up, he realized that the wall was caretaker sure. What's wrong? You look absent-minded, caretaker Sure asked, startling a flock of birds in the surroundings. Rinpoche took another 2 steps back before he composed himself and said, "Nothing, I'm just thinking about something. How's the shaved ice shop?" Caretaker Sure immediately became happy when he mentioned this matter. He took 2 steps forward and almost slapped Rinpoche to the ground. After that, he laughed heartily and said, "Brother Ren, you're awesome. If we do as you say, the shop would be extremely busy for the next 2 days." Rinpoche rubbed his shoulder and grimaced in pain. Just now, he wanted to dodge but failed. Caretaker Sure's movements were much faster than his. "As long as the business is good, it's good. However, don't slap me." Rinpoche saw Caretaker Sure raise his palm again and hurriedly jumped far away like a rabbit. Caretaker Sure laughed a few more times. It was obvious that he was really happy. Caretaker Sure stretched out his palm and said, "These 2 days, we have been selling 1 to 200 bowls a day. It's a shop. A bowl cost 5 copper coins, so 1,000,000 coins would be 5 taels of silver. In other words, they could earn 7 to 8 taels of silver a day, and the profit would be at least 60%. In other words, they could earn 4 to 5 taels of silver a day, and in a month, they would earn 100 taels of silver. As for the money for the shop and the labor, they did not have much left. After deducting them, they would have at least 80 taels of silver a month. The 2 shops added up to a total of 160 taels. If they split the profits, each person would get 80 taels. To Caretaker Sure, whose monthly salary was only 6 taels, it was equivalent to his annual salary. No wonder he was so happy. However, Rinpoche's attention was completely focused on Caretaker Sure's palm. No matter how hard he racked his brains, he could not figure out how Caretaker Sure's 5 fingers had anything to do with 1 or 2. Were the people of Dayo all like this? Just by gesturing a number, he would stretch out all 5 fingers? After listening to Caretaker Sure's words, Rinpoche nodded his head slightly. Earning money was within his expectations. In fact, it was slightly less than what he had expected. After all, Dayo was so hot. This kind of shaved ice would definitely sell well. Some of the people who sold ice cream on the pedestrian streets in China earned quite a lot in a month. Furthermore, the weather here was even hotter. Furthermore, this was an exclusive business. Rinpoche reckoned that he would be able to sell more shaved ice cream after word of mouth spread. This would continue until the secret of saltpeter was discovered. Hire 2 more people. I reckon this business will last for a period of time, Rinpoche said. I will listen to you. Now that he saw the money, Caretaker Sure was immediately filled with heroism. He would do whatever Rinpoche said and was not worried at all. Chapter 63. When he woke up, he was back in his bedroom in China. When will it end? Rinpoche rubbed his face and sat up from the bed. He did not need to worry about China anymore. A collaboration with the Chen family for the black mud cream recipe was enough for him to eat for the rest of his life. Now, he had to stabilize his position in Dayo. At the very least, he wouldn't lose his head one day. After sitting on the bed in a daze for a while, he saw that the sky had already started to brighten. He opened the window and a gust of cold wind blew in. It's getting colder, Rinpoche muttered to himself. The time between the 2 sides was not equal. Basically, a round trip would take 12 days, and 3 trips would take more than a month. He only felt that 10 days had passed, but in reality, a month had passed. Therefore, he felt that the climate change was particularly abrupt. Another reason was that after returning from that world, he felt that the air in the city was especially turbid and had a pungent smell. This made him more and more reluctant to go out. After standing in front of the window in a daze for a while, Rinpoche thought that it would be great if he could see the profits from the black mud cream earlier. At that time, he could buy a small island and live on it without having to endure this turbid air. However, he also knew that the black mud cream was destined to take a long time to reap results. 3 to 5 years was considered short. Not to mention the research and development of the drug and the subsequent experiments, just building a pharmaceutical factory from scratch was not a simple task. It seemed that he still had to think of ways to earn more money. Distant water cannot quench present thirst. After thinking about it, he realized that there wasn't anything that he could bring back to Dayo to make money from. Would he dare to sell pandas? Even he didn't dare to use the sharp-toothed tiger skin. There was no such creature on Earth. The closest one was the sword-thorn tiger, which had gone extinct hundreds of millions of years ago. Basically, whatever they had on Earth, they didn't dare to take it out, or even if they did, they wouldn't have much value. He didn't dare to take out things that Earth didn't have. Unless it was something like a prescription, but the benefits were still too slow. He could earn about 80 taels of silver a month. Including the shop that was still under renovation, he could earn about 100 taels of silver, which was about 40 to 50,000 taels of silver. With the addition of the air cooler, he might be able to earn more. However, there seemed to be a risk in selling silver in large quantities over a long period of time. For an ordinary person, 4 to 500,000 yuan a year was a lot, but for the current rinbachian, it was like a drop in the bucket. Worrying about selling whey powder and earning money from selling cabbages. This was the kind of person who said this. Rinbachian suddenly recalled that Dayo seemed to have a lot of gemstones. He wondered if he could find out more about them after he returned to Dayo. It would be more feasible to bring back some gems. It would be best if the quantity was small but the value was huge. After being in a daze for a while, Rinbachian switched on his phone, which had been switched off all this while, to take a look. Just as he switched it on, a few missed calls and messages popped up. 2 from Qin Qing, 1 from Dong Haiqing, 1 from Qin Bing, and 1 from his family. He dialed the number back, and as soon as the call connected, he heard someone scolding him. "You still know how to call back? I called you, but your phone was turned off. I couldn't find you. If you didn't call me back, I would have called the police and reported you missing." Rinbachian moved the phone away from his ear. After a long time, he waited for the person on the other side to finish scolding him before saying, "Recently, the company has been rather busy. I work overtime every day and didn't notice that my phone ran out of battery. I just finished my work today, so I called to greet you." "Oh, you even know how to use words?" Rinbachian's mother mumbled before asking, "How's the situation at the company?" "Very good, it's getting better and better." Rinbachian changed to a relaxed tone. "Forget it, I don't know about those things. Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival. Are you coming back? It's still not too late to take a taxi." "Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival?" Rinbachian asked doubtfully. "Have you been living a stupid life? You don't even know the date?" "Oh, I've been too busy recently and didn't notice. I'll set off now and will be back in the afternoon," Rinbachian replied hurriedly. "That's more like it. Come back soon." After hanging up the phone, Rinbachian heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that only a few days had passed. More than 2 months had passed. He had a look of resentment on his face. When was he going to end? However, after thinking about it, if he really transmigrated to that world and couldn't return, he didn't know how sad his family would be. Rinbachian felt that the current situation wasn't too bad. Rinbachian looked at Qin Qing's missed calls and suddenly remembered that Qin Qing's engagement date was approaching. It was a pity that he didn't have anything good to give him. Qin Qing had money and didn't seem to lack anything. After thinking about it, Rinbachian decided not to call him back. After washing up, he changed his clothes, went downstairs and drove home. Rinbachian's hometown was about 300 kilometers away. He arrived at his neighborhood in the afternoon. Looking at the familiar but slightly dilapidated neighborhood, Rinbachian felt an inexplicable sense of comfort. This was the feeling of home. "Brother, brother!" Rinbachian heard someone shouting and looked up. He saw his brother waving at him from the window. Rinbachian smiled, locked his car, went upstairs and knocked on the door. "Is the Audi downstairs yours?" Rinbachian's father asked as soon as he opened the door. "Your eyesight is really good." Rinbachian gave him a thumbs up. "Nonsense, it's not like you don't know that I have telescopic vision." Rinbachian's father gave him a slap on the head. "Give me the keys, I'll go for a stroll." Rinbachian smiled and threw the keys to his father. He knew that his father had always liked cars, but he had 2 children to support. After so many years, he had only bought a second-hand Alto to use as a means of transportation. Therefore, when he saw this car, he couldn't help but feel excited. "Look at you, it's just a car. What's so good about driving?" His mother's voice came from the kitchen. His father ignored her, took the keys, and rushed out excitedly. "Brother, do you have a gift for me?" Rinpoche's brothers surrounded him as soon as his father left. Rinpoche's brother, Rinwanyen, was in his 3rd year of high school this year. He was taller than him, more handsome, had good grades, and was cheerful. It seemed that all the good points of the family were concentrated on him. However, between the two brothers, one was Rinpoche and the other was Rinwanyen. It could be seen that their parents had high expectations for them. Regarding this expectation, Rinpoche only wanted to say, "I really can't do it. I'll buy you a mobile phone tomorrow." Rinpoche looked at his brother's height and the fact that he could definitely rely on his looks to make a living. He couldn't help but feel envious and jealous. "Thank you, brother." Rinwanyen immediately beamed with joy. Rinpoche put down the things, went into the kitchen, and saw that they were all his favorite dishes. It seemed like they had just started cooking. It seemed that his mother had been preparing for the whole morning and was waiting for him to come home. She was afraid that he wouldn't be able to eat hot food. "Since you are back, go to one side and don't be a hindrance." His mother's words threw the little bit of warmth that had just risen in Rinpoche's heart into the gutter. He touched his nose and went to sit on the sofa. "Brother, what does your company do?" Rinwanyen moved to Rinpoche's side and asked. "Medicine." "Medicine? Brother, when did you learn about this?" Rinwanyen asked curiously. "Your brother knows a lot." Rinpoche had a proud look on his face. Chapter 64. Not long after, when the dishes were ready, his father also came back at the right time. He opened his mouth and asked, "How much is your car?" Rinpoche looked at the kitchen and gestured 6. He didn't dare to say anything as he was afraid that his mother would hear him and nag him again. "It's indeed promising, but it's too extravagant. Your company has just been established, and we don't know what the future holds. Don't just think about enjoying life. You should keep more money by your side so that you can make a comeback if anything happens," Rinpoche's father said. "How much do you have in your pockets?" "I'll leave the 300,000 here. Take it back if you need it. There's still a few 100,000 left. Don't worry, it's enough. There's nothing to spend money on right now. We just have to wait for the subsequent profits. Didn't we agree last time? I'll provide the technology and the others will provide the money." Rinpoche laughed. In his heart, he knew that his father was saying these words of wisdom. Indeed, 2 million yuan could not do much. With the remaining money, he could hold on until the pharmaceutical factory was built and the medicine was on the market. However, if something happened to his family, he would be at a loss. It seemed that he still had to find a way to earn more money like what he had thought in the morning. While they were eating, Rinpoche's mother asked him with a kind face, "You are quite successful now, but you are already so old. Do you have a girlfriend?" Rinpoche was at a loss. "I'm only 24 years old, what do you mean by that?" "Your Aunt Huang has a niece. She's pretty and tall. Do you want to get to know her? I think I can find someone better." Rinpoche quickly rejected her. He was only 24, and he was running around in 2 different worlds. How was he supposed to find a girlfriend? Disappearing for 8 to 10 days every 3 days? If that was the case, it would be more reliable for him to find a wife there than on Earth. At the thought of this, Rinpoche felt even more resentful. Over there, even a woman could beat him up with one hand. Listening to his mother's nagging, Rinpoche almost buried his face in his bowl. All he could hear was Auntie Huang's daughter. "So what? You set your sights higher after earning money. How is Auntie Huang's daughter suitable for marriage?" He didn't expect that he would have such a day. And in the foreseeable future, there would be many more days like this. After the meal, Rinpoche ran back to the house as if he was fleeing for his life. The next day, Rinpoche brought Rinwanyen to buy the latest mobile phone, and Rinwanyen was beaming with joy. "Remember, when you see a good cabbage, you have to take it first. Don't be like me. When I was in school, I wouldn't allow any contact with girls even if I was beaten to death. After I graduated, I couldn't wait to hug a grandchild. Renbachien pulled Renwanyen's hand with a face full of resentment. Renwanyen rolled his eyes and laughed heartily. Anyway, even if the sky falls down, there will be someone taller to hold it up. You are the elder brother, and you are not married yet. Why should I be anxious? Renbachien was speechless. He had become a shield. However, when he thought about how it would be like this every time he returned home, he felt a headache coming on. It seemed like he would have to rent a girlfriend if he didn't want to be nagged. He didn't know if she was reliable or not. After staying at home for 2 days, he drove back early in the morning on the third day. In the afternoon, he went to the supermarket and bought quite a lot of White Rabbit creamy candies. All of this was to bribe librarian Lin Xiaola. Normally, little girls would like this, right? Like a weird uncle, Renbachien pondered over how to make the little girl happy. After all, being illiterate was not an easy life. He guarded so many scrolls, but he couldn't understand a single one of them. After buying a bunch of White Rabbit creamy candies, he went to buy 2 electric batons and charged them at home before returning Qing's call. You finally called back. Otherwise, I would have reported you to the police and reported you missing. Renbachien smiled bitterly. This was basically the same reaction. How are the preparations for your engagement with Jiang Nan going? Renbachien asked with a smile. On the 8th of next month, you should be fine by then, right? Don't miss it, Qing whispered. Renbachien could tell from his voice that he was probably with a girl now. After calculating the time, including today, there were still 10 days left. By then he would be back. Only then did he say, "Don't worry, I won't miss it." "All right then, I won't say any more." Qing hung up the phone after finishing his sentence. Renbachien shook his head. They were getting engaged in 10 days, and he was still fooling around outside. It must have been hard on Jiang Nan to actually tolerate him. Renbachien hoped that after the engagement, Qing would change his mind. Thinking about Qing's character, he was usually quite reliable and should be able to do it. This was the last time he would go crazy before the engagement. At night, Renbachien directly returned to that world with a bunch of White Rabbit creamy candies and 2 electric batons. After waking up in the morning, he inserted the 2 electric batons into his waist. Renbachien felt that he was like a Jedi, except for the fact that the 2 electric batons were a little short and small. Just when he was feeling satisfied in the house, he saw a black shadow moving up and down by the window. From the shadow, it had a fat head and big ears, and the ears were even on top of its head. When he opened the door, he saw Tian lying on the floor and Gun stepping on its body, trying to think of a way to open the window. After seeing Renbachien, Tian immediately got up and walked away. It didn't care that there was a fellow on its body. Just like that, Gungun's stool was taken away. It fell head first onto the floor and rolled around. After shaking its head for a long time, it crawled over and hugged Renbachien's thigh, shaking it continuously. Renbachien teased the 2 little fellows for a while and went to get a basket of bamboo leaves for them. In the morning, he went to the fields for a walk. When he was about to return, he saw a badly battered caretaker Shi striding towards Renbachien. As he walked, he shouted, "Brother Ren, why can't you use your sect's secret treasure?" "Can't use it?" Renbachien was slightly puzzled. "Let me take a look. Also, what happened to your face?" Renbachien took it and immediately poked it at caretaker Shi. The badly battered caretaker Shi looked at Renbachien and laughed heartily. He almost slapped Renbachien into the ground again. "It's out of battery." Renbachien hid far away from him and said doubtfully, "Logically speaking, it should be able to be recharged more than 10 times. Why did it run out so quickly? How do you charge it? Do you want to be struck by lightning during a thunderstorm to recharge?" Caretaker Shi asked curiously. Renbachien looked at him silently. Be struck by lightning during a thunderstorm to recharge? Good idea. Li Yuanba probably had the same idea. The 2 of them must have a common language. However, the ancient people knew too little about electricity. Their knowledge was also very simple. It was normal for them to think this way. Why did it run out so quickly? Renbachien asked. He was curious about what Caretaker Shur did with this thing. He thought about Caretaker Shur's character. His 2 eyes were like national treasures. His face and the corners of his mouth were swollen with blood clots. Renbachian felt that something must have happened. Sure enough, it was as Renbachian expected. When Caretaker Shur heard Renbachian's question, he laughed heartily. With a proud look on his face, he said, "Those fellows still dared to show off to me. I fought against 8 of them." Chapter 65. Renbachian quickly took 2 steps back and said, "If someone seeks revenge, don't say that I gave it to you. Don't worry, Brother Ren. If they ask me, I will tell them that this is your sect's secret treasure." Caretaker Shur laughed heartily. Renbachian face-bombed. "What a pig-like teammate. You took the stun baton to stir up trouble and even sold me out. You can fight against 8 people, but 8 of me can't even defeat 1 person." Renbachian wanted to cry, but no tears came out. "Who exactly did you beat up?" "Shurgua from Lan City's Public Order Bureau, Shur Kai and Shurda from the Imperial Guard Camp, Shur Qing and Shurjin from the Left Army, Shur Meng from the Department of Military Arms, and Shur Feng from the Left Army. These people always say that I am the caretaker of the Beast Park. Let's see who dares to say anything now." Caretaker Shur looked pleased. Renbachian's face darkened as he listened. "You can find so many people with different positions to fight with just a stun baton. If I give you a gun, will you still be able to fly? Didn't you just beat up your own family?" Renbachian regretted that this thing fell into Caretaker Shur's hands. "It's out of battery. Let's recharge it when we have the chance." Renbachian walked back listlessly. Caretaker Shur was all smiles as he continuously bragged about how he punched the Public Order Bureau and kicked the guards away. If Renbachian did not see Caretaker Shur's bruised and swollen face, he might have believed him. "Where is Shur Wanshun? Ask him to come out." Before Renbachian could return, he heard shouts coming from the front. "This group of people found me so quickly. How did they find me so quickly?" Renbachian's heart skipped a beat. He glared at Caretaker Shur. His meaning was clear. "You are the one who caused this trouble. You should settle it. Give me another 2 secret treasures. I can still beat up 8 of them by myself." Caretaker Shur laughed. Renbachian was speechless. He took out a stun baton from his waist and threw it to Caretaker Shur. "I only have 1. Think of a way to deal with them. Bear your own responsibility." Caretaker Shur laughed mischievously. With a majestic posture, he dashed in the direction of the voice. "Shur Wanshun, you bastard, come out." The cursing continued, and he could tell that there were quite a few voices. It was likely that all of them had come looking for him together, or they had come looking for him separately and bumped into him at the door. Renbachian shook his head. This time, they were prepared. Was Caretaker Shur still thinking of fighting against 8 of them? Dream on. If he went, he probably wouldn't be able to return. It was better for him to find a place to hide. "Don't let people follow the clues and find me here." After walking 1 round outside, Renbachian estimated that it was almost lunchtime before he went back. As soon as he returned, he saw Caretaker Shur standing there with his head and face covered in dirt. He could not even recognize his face. "Brother Ren, they are too shameless. 8 of them are ganging up on me." Caretaker Shur pulled Renbachian's hand and complained. "Previously, you said that you could defeat all 8 of them by yourself." Renbachian couldn't help but complain. "I fought them 1 by 1. Along the way, I fought against 8 of them. How can it be the same when the 8 of them attacked me together?" Caretaker Shur sighed. "Forget it, let's find it next time." Renbachian had no choice but to comfort her. "Your sect's secret treasure? No, it's just that one. The other one ran out of battery because of you." Renbachian threw Caretaker Shur aside and ran over to scoop rice. Needless to say, that electric baton must have fallen into someone else's hands. Ignoring Caretaker Shur's bruised and swollen face, the others also turned a blind eye. It was common for men in Dayo to be in such a situation. They even teased him a little. "First, I fought against 8 of them. I punched the Public Order Division and kicked Swajun. Then the 8 of them attacked me together. I was outnumbered. Caretaker Shi refused to relent and insisted that he once fought against 8 of them. The odd-job workers in the courtyard roared with laughter. The hierarchy in this world wasn't that strict. These odd-job workers were like company employees while Caretaker Shi was like the company manager. Both parties could still make harmless jokes. This made Rinpoche feel rather comfortable. After lunch, Rinpoche carried half a bag of white rabbit creamy candies and entered the palace. While walking, he threw one into his mouth. It tasted pretty good. It had a strong milky fragrance. No wonder it had lasted for so many years. He chewed as he walked. When he arrived at Qingshin Palace Hall, Rinpoche liked to chew. He found it troublesome to keep it in his mouth. Lin Xiaola sat on the chair. This time, she finally heard the sound of Rinpoche opening the door. She drowsily opened her eyes. After seeing that it was Rinpoche, she yawned and prepared to continue sleeping. "This is for you." Rinpoche took out 3 white rabbit creamy candies and threw them on the table. "What's that?" Lin Xiaola finally opened her eyes when she heard about food. It seemed that foodies weren't just an attribute of Earthlings. It was the same for people from the other world. Looking at the 3 little things on the table, Lin Xiaola snorted. "Humph, you want to bribe me with these things? This is for you. Try it. I'm sure you haven't eaten it before." Rinpoche took out another candy from his bosom, removed the wrapper and threw it into his mouth. He looked like he was trying to abduct a little girl. Lin Xiaola looked disgusted. Her hands moved quickly and copied Rinpoche's actions. She removed the wrapper and threw it into her mouth. Lin Xiaola's eyes widened. She looked like she had eaten something good. She wiped the table with her claws and the 2 candies were gone. Then, she said to Rinpoche with an unclear voice, "What do you want to do?" "Teach me how to read," Rinpoche replied. "I knew you were up to no good. 100 a day. This thing." Lin Xiaola immediately fell under the taste of the white rabbit creamy candies. She showed 2 of them to Rinpoche and haggled. 10. This thing is very rare. You haven't seen it before, right? How can you make 100 such exquisite candies a day? Rinpoche said. 100 candies wasn't a lot. 1.5 bags were worth about 40 yuan. It was much cheaper than hiring a teacher. However, he still had to bring them over from the real world. Furthermore, it was quite troublesome to bring a bag of candies into the palace every time. 50. Lin Xiaola hesitated for a long time. Finally, she stretched out her hand and spread her 5 fingers. Rinpoche was gratified. She was indeed literate. He finally met someone who could count. However, he said, 15. I really can't have too many. It's too troublesome to make them. Finally, after haggling, they settled on 20 pieces of candies a day. After that, Rinpoche was elated. He could finally learn how to read. Let's start today. Tomorrow, I will sleep for a while more. Lin Xiaola immediately closed her eyes and laid her head on the table. 20. What about here? Rinpoche helplessly took out a handful of white rabbit creamy candies. Lin Xiaola immediately opened her eyes wide. Teach me how to read first, Rinpoche said. Give me this first. Lin Xiaola didn't back down this time. I will give you 10 first. I will give you the rest after I finish learning today. Rinpoche continued to haggle like a hawker for a few candies. Chapter 66. The characters in this world were also pictograms. Even though they were different from Chinese characters and required a period of time to learn to write, it wasn't difficult to learn how to read. You just had to compare the characters in this world with Chinese characters. Knowing which characters to compare with saved a lot of effort. Rinpoche's main goal was to learn how to read and not write. Every time Lin Xiaola wrote a word, Rinpoche would compare it with his memory and write it twice. Then he nodded and said, "Got it, next." Lin Xiaola was surprised that he learned 40 to 50 words in one afternoon. Have you really memorized them? Lin Xiaola asked curiously. Rinpoche found all the words that he had just written, pointed at them one by one and said, "This is Da, this is Yao, this is Her Majesty, this is Her Majesty." After saying them one by one, he folded his arms and looked at Lin Xiaola's slightly opened mouth in surprise. A sense of pride arose spontaneously. At this rate, he would be able to learn most of the words in about 2 months. After all, there were only 3 to 2,000 commonly used Chinese characters. As long as he could learn 3 to 2,000 words, he would be able to say goodbye to being illiterate. At night, he told the Empress a story. The next day, he took a handful of White Rabbit creamy candies to learn from Lin Xiaola. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Rinpochian felt that Lin Xiaola's eyes were flickering when she looked at him. Could it be that she was shocked by my super-fast learning ability? Rinpochian was slightly pleased with himself. In any case, he graduated from university. Coming to this world and shocking a woman with his super-fast learning ability wasn't something to be proud of. At this point, Rinpochian calmed himself down and began to learn diligently. At night, he finally understood what Lin Xiaola's flickering eyes meant. The Empress was lying on the couch and elegantly took out a piece of White Rabbit creamy candies from nowhere. At that time, Rinpochian's eyes almost popped out. How did this thing fall into the hands of the Empress? Lin Xiaola, that silly and adorable-looking fellow, actually sold him out? Although it was just a few pieces of candies, this thing wasn't available in Dayo. Rinpochian took out such a rare thing to bribe her but didn't offer it to the Empress. What would the Empress think? Rinpochian swallowed a mouthful of saliva as he watched the Empress remove the wrapper and place the milk candy in her mouth. He took 3 large steps forward and raised a handful of milk candy above his head. "I have a gift for your Majesty. These are some milk candies that I have painstakingly obtained. Although they are not very precious, they are exquisitely made and taste sweet. I dare not keep them for myself, so I have specially come to offer them to your Majesty." Qing Yuan covered her mouth and chuckled as she took the handful of sweets away. The Empress looked at Rinpochian and said, "At least you know what's going on. What's this called?" "Milk candies." Rinpochian wiped off his sweat. Fortunately, he had brought more today. Sometimes he would also eat a piece. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy for him to get through tonight. "From now on, I'll give you 1 dough every month," the Empress said casually. "Yes," Rinpochian answered honestly with his head lowered. A bucket weighed more than 6 caddies. 1 bucket per month. Was this person eating candy like rice? In the future, the Empress would toss White Rabbit creamy candy into her mouth before she fought with anyone. This didn't seem right. When he was talking about the investiture of the gods today, Rinpochian noticed that the Empress's mouth didn't seem to be idle. Every now and then, she would put a White Rabbit creamy candy into her mouth. Furthermore, looking at her expression, she seemed to be enjoying it. This made Rinpochian suddenly realize that this Empress had a special characteristic. She loved to eat sweets. Previously, she loved to eat steamed pork in double scoop and the like. At this moment, Rinpochian felt that some of the Empress's gluttonous traits seemed to have awakened. He hoped that in the future, she wouldn't find trouble with him when she had a toothache from eating candy. "You said that you are also proficient in poetry, right?" the Empress suddenly asked when he was about to leave after he finished his story. Without waiting for him to reply, she continued, "I remember now. Bright moonlight in front of the window, 2 pairs of shoes on the ground. Was this what you recited at that time?" Damn it. Upon hearing this, Rinpochian finally knew why he was almost dragged out and beheaded when he first met her. It's a slip of the tongue, a slip of the tongue. Bright moonlight in front of the bed, suspected to be frost on the ground, 2 pairs of shoes on the ground. Rinpochian's forehead was full of sweat again. In a few days, some people will be delivering gifts. When the time comes, you will help to receive them, the Empress said coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty." Rinpochian was slightly stunned. He didn't expect that he would be given such a task. However, he still hurriedly agreed to it. Following which, the Empress sat on the couch and frowned. Rinpochian had no choice but to wait for her. When the time comes, if there is someone, suppress their arrogance. If you do a good job, you will be rewarded. After a while, the Empress's voice continued to be heard. If you lose the face of Dayo, you should know the consequences. Rinpochian was puzzled. What did she skip at the beginning? If there is someone, suppress their arrogance? However, The latter part of the Empress's words made his heart tighten. He knew that the Empress in front of him was definitely not joking with him. He quickly raised his head and asked, "Your Majesty, may I know who is coming?" "What's the matter?" "You will know when the time comes. I will get someone to inform you and arrange an identity for you." After the Empress finished speaking, she waved her hand and said, "You may leave." After Rinpoche left the palace, his mind was still at a loss. What kind of person? Suppress their arrogance? It should be easy to receive them. The most troublesome thing was to suppress the other party's arrogance. From the Empress's tone, it seemed that she didn't like the people who came. Otherwise, she wouldn't have asked him to suppress their arrogance. But who was the other party? What was his identity? How could he suppress them? Rinpoche had no idea about any of these. However, after combining the Empress's last sentence, Rinpoche understood something. In any case, he couldn't lose the face of Dayo. If he did so, he would definitely suffer. As for the rest, he had to understand what was going on first. After returning to the Beast Park, Rinpoche immediately went to look for Caretaker Shur. "What's going to happen during this period of time?" Rinpoche asked. Caretaker Shur was a little confused. He didn't understand what Rinpoche meant. "Today, Her Majesty said that someone will be coming to deliver gifts during this period of time." Caretaker Shur pondered for a long time and counted with his fingers. Finally, he came to a realization and patted Rinpoche's shoulder. "So, it's Her Majesty's birthday celebration." "Ah." Every year, many people from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation will come to celebrate Her Majesty's birthday. Many of them are the sons of those so-called aristocratic families. However, their physiques are like little chicks. It's not enough for me to strangle them. Rinpoche felt that his physique was like that of a little chick. However, why are they coming to celebrate Her Majesty's birthday? Rinpoche was puzzled. If the officials from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation were here to deliver gifts, it would be understandable. However, what were those so-called aristocratic families doing here? Chapter 67. After hearing Caretaker Shur's explanation, Rinpoche immediately understood. Occupation, Empress. Strength, 7th in the world. Wealth, owns an entire nation. Appearance, fair skin, beautiful and alluring. Such a person, no matter where she was placed, would be a proper fair, rich and beautiful lady among fair, rich and beautiful ladies. It was very normal for people to have designs on the Empress. Therefore, every time the Empress celebrated her birthday, there would be many rich and powerful people from the other 3 nations rushing to Dayo. Every one of them was like livestock in heat, trying to get the Empress's attention. This was the only time they could come into contact with the Empress. Rinpoche also understood why the Empress asked him to help with the reception. After all, these people were here to deliver gifts. She couldn't possibly let them stay in an inn by themselves. She had to make some arrangements as the Empress still wanted to save face. However, even though this group of people were here to deliver gifts, some of them definitely annoyed the Empress. She had been wanting to slap them for a long time. For some reason, she didn't say much about this matter, so she skipped a sentence. However, her meaning was clear. No matter what, they couldn't embarrass Dayo. This sentence was more particular. How was this considered embarrassing Dayo? If the Aboriginals were to do this, they would probably talk about how big their fists were when they were talking about poems and songs. When they were talking about romance, they would compare whose legs were thicker. After all, it was the Empress's birthday celebration. They couldn't possibly be bruised and swollen. Therefore, a talent, like him who suddenly appeared in front of the Empress, was used as a substitute. She didn't care how good he was. In any case, it was like this every year. No matter how bad he was, he wouldn't be worse than the previous years. Therefore, he simply put himself on the stage. Thinking about the people who might come, he reckoned that they were the elites of the younger generation. Those who weren't confident would definitely not come. The Empress actually asked him to suppress these people? Rinpoche felt that it would be good if he wasn't suppressed by them. If he was not careful, he would become a prop or a stepping stone for them to show off. In an instant, Rinpochen felt unwell. Thinking about the Empress's words, Rinpochen felt that if he really became a stepping stone, the Empress would make him a stepping stone for the rest of his life. Thinking about that, damn it, I will fight it out with them. Rinpoche's face was full of murderous intent. What are we fighting for? Caretaker sure raised his head blankly. When is Her Majesty's birthday celebration? Rinpochen asked. There's still one more month, probably? Caretaker sure replied uncertainly. Why did His Majesty mention this to you today? Her Majesty asked me to accompany her and receive her, Rinpochen said with a face full of resentment. Let's welcome them then. Anyway, we just have to arrange a place for them to stay when they arrive, Caretaker sure said nonchalantly. Her Majesty also said that we can't disgrace Dayo. Rinpochen continued to look resentful. Isn't that simple? Beat up anyone who was dissatisfied with you. Beat up anyone who didn't like you. Beat up anyone who didn't like you. Just beat them up until they can't open their mouths. Caretaker sure laughed heartily. Rinpochen sighed faintly. This was indeed the style of the Aboriginals. Needless to say, he might really have to bring along 2 thugs when the time comes. In this world, Aboriginals weren't the only ones who could fight. If that Long Wanli didn't challenge the Empress that day, he reckoned that he could do whatever he wanted. Rinpochen greeted Caretaker sure and returned to his room. The 2 little chaps were hugging each other and sleeping soundly at the door. Rinpochen dove into his bed and started to ponder. Let's not talk about the background of the people who came this time. In any case, no matter how awesome they were, they definitely wouldn't be as awesome as Her Majesty. According to their individual standards, they could be divided into those who were outstanding in martial arts, literary talent, eloquence, and appearance. Those who were outstanding in martial arts seemed to be unpresentable. In any case, no matter how formidable they wouldn't be as formidable as Her Majesty. In the entire world, there were only 6 people who were more formidable than her. He reckoned that these people wouldn't come. After all, experts had to maintain their status. It was even more impossible for them to think of robbing the cradle, right? As for those who were outstanding in literary talent, Her Majesty had specially mentioned poetry and songs previously. Judging from the Empress's words, the Empress probably wanted him to suppress these people. There weren't many cultured people in Dayo. Furthermore, this bunch of people still came over every year to show off their literary talent. The Empress was probably already very annoyed. Rinpochen thought that if a certain master's or PhD student came to his place every day to brag about their fields of expertise, his heart definitely wouldn't be filled with endless admiration like a torrential river. Instead, he would want to slap their faces with the soles of his shoes. He reckoned that the Empress had this kind of feeling. What was that saying again? When the monarch worries, his subjects worry. When the monarch is humiliated, his subjects die. Even though he was a successor to socialism in the 21st century, his immediate superior was the Empress. If the Empress wanted to slap their faces with the soles of her shoes, he would be the vanguard. After thinking it through, Rinpochen more or less had some confidence in himself. Even though the people he would be facing might be elites from various clans in other countries, he was still a university graduate. He couldn't possibly be inferior to a few elites from a feudal society. There was still some time left. Next time, he would go back and memorize 300 Tang and Song poems. He didn't believe that the crystallization of the wisdom of the ancients couldn't defeat a few elites from a few clans. Even though he could also make their eyeballs pop out of their sockets when he competed with them in mathematics, the final result would probably be like a chicken talking to a duck. There wasn't much meaning to it. The next day, Rinpochen arrived at Qingxin Palace Hall. After seeing Lin Xiaola, he had a look of hidden bitterness on his face. He was wondering if he should bring her poop-flavored chocolate or chocolate-flavored poop next time. Why are you looking at me like that? Lin Xiaola asked unnaturally when she saw Rinpochen's resentful gaze. Rinpochen thought for a while and didn't say anything. After all, as a man, he couldn't be calculative with a little girl. It would give people the impression that he was narrow-minded. Even though he was indeed narrow-minded. He decided to bring her chocolate-flavored poop. The other party wasn't a fool. She probably wouldn't eat poop-flavored chocolate. Let's continue. Renbachien pulled a stool over and sat directly opposite her. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Lin Xiaola heaved a sigh of relief. She was still a little nervous just now, even though she felt that this feeling was very baffling. Renbachien spent the entire afternoon learning a few dozen words. At the end of the lesson, he also reviewed what he learned yesterday. Seeing that he hadn't forgotten anything, Renbachien immediately felt very satisfied. At night, he went to the palace to tell a story as usual. At the same time, he gave the Empress a bag of White Rabbit creamy candy. This made the Empress rather satisfied. She felt that Renbachien was rather tactful and found him increasingly pleasing to the eye. It wouldn't be a problem for a bunch of burly men in the imperial court to lead troops into battle. However, it would be difficult for them to be tactful and tactful. Following the birth of Neza, the evisceration of his father, the lotus incarnation, Jiangxia's descent from the mountain, and the burning of the Pipa spirit, the story became more and more exciting. Even the Empress rarely interrupted him. Instead, she concentrated on listening to the story. From time to time, she would put a piece of White Rabbit creamy candy in her mouth. One person told the story while the other three listened. Sometimes, the fire in the palace flickered due to the wind. Renbachien suddenly felt that this kind of atmosphere was a little suitable for telling a ghost story. However, when he thought about the Empress's fighting strength, Renbachien felt that it was better to forget this idea as soon as possible. If other women were to listen to a ghost story, they might become a helpless little bird. If the Empress wasn't afraid while listening to a ghost story, it would be fine. If she was really afraid, she would give him a slap. Next year, today would be his death anniversary. That night, the story of the investiture of the gods was told a little later than usual. Since the Empress didn't say anything, Renbachien told it all the way until Bo Yikao went to Zhaoge to pay tribute and was sent to prison. Only then was he released by the Empress. The next morning, Renbachien dragged Teng Hulu and Tai Dao out for a walk. After returning home tonight, it would be Chun Qing's engagement day. He wanted to see if there were any good things to buy as a gift. Although he already knew that Dayo was lacking in supplies, after visiting a few shops on Jingyang Street, he realized that it was far more lacking than he thought. Most of the things sold in the shops were refined rice, refined flour, wine, salt, cloth, and other necessities. Furthermore, the prices weren't low. There were also a few shops that sold brightly colored cloth, silk satin, exquisite porcelain, and the like. The prices could make Renbachien spurt blood. Originally, Renbachien wanted to choose a gift for Chun Qing here. In the end, after walking around for a long time, he still couldn't find anything suitable. Chapter 68. When he woke up again, it was already early in the morning. Looking at the sky that was just starting to brighten, Renbachien lay in bed for a long time before getting up. Today was Chun Qing's engagement day. No matter what, he had to make a trip there. The two work suits in the wardrobe could no longer be worn. Renbachien measured his body size and realized that he had gained at least 10 kilograms recently. Originally, he was around 120 kilograms, but now he was at least 130 kilograms. His meals were all meat from morning to night. It would be strange if he didn't get fat. On Earth, Renbachien's physique was just right. However, in Dayo, according to caretaker Shi, he was as thin and weak as a chicken. He casually put on some clothes and went out for breakfast. Then he went to buy a blue suit, which cost him a few thousand yuan. It was not very expensive, but it was quite suitable for him. After that, he gave Chun Qing a call to ask about the engagement date. When he found out that it was nighttime, Renbachien ran to the supermarket and bought a huge pile of White Rabbit creamy candies and various kinds of chocolates, including 15 kilograms of White Rabbit creamy candies and various kinds of chocolates. He spent about 2,000 yuan. After stuffing these things into the trunk, Renbachien went to buy 300 poems of the Tang dynasty and 300 poems of the Song dynasty. Since the Empress had personally instructed him to do so, he didn't dare to be careless. He planned to memorize it and see if anyone dared to act pretentiously, he would rebuke them. After sending everything home, Rinpoche lay on the sofa and groaned. He felt that the sofa on earth was much more comfortable than the stool in that world. It was extremely hard. If he wanted to make a sofa, he would have to wait for some time for the leather to be tanned. Looking at the time, it would take another 8 to 10 days. At that time, he would send a set to the Empress and then make a long set to put in his room. That way, he would have a place to lie down at night. After lying on the sofa for a while, he got up to charge the electric baton and uploaded the photos to his computer. Then he registered a new Weibo account called Starting from Zero and uploaded the photos of Tian Tian and Gun Gun. Some were sleeping, some were fooling around, some were throwing a tantrum, and some were hugging his thighs. There were 20 to 30 pictures in a row. After that, he selected a few photos of the Beast Park that he felt were pretty good and uploaded them. Regardless of whether or not anyone paid attention to this Weibo post, it was still a record of his time in the other world. After doing all these, Rinpoche took out 300 poems of the Tang dynasty and started to recite it. If he wanted to follow the Empress's instructions and use the soles of his shoes to slap people's faces, he had to first memorize it thoroughly. A month's time was neither long nor short. 3 days in the real world was equivalent to 1 day in the other world. In the other world, he could return 6 or 7 times a month. The time in the two worlds added together was about 1.5 months. But time was still tight. He had to work hard to show off and slap faces. Wait a minute, did he remember something wrong? Suddenly, a thought flashed across Rinpoche's mind. Something seemed to be amiss. First, the Empress's birthday was in a month's time. Caretaker Shi's estimate was just about right. Secondly, the feudal society was not like the modern society. At that time, transportation was not developed. Ordinary people would not be far from home for their entire lives. A long journey would easily take 10 days to half a month, and they would not even be in the same country. For a big event like the Empress's birthday, they would definitely set off in advance. As such, there was an 80% chance that they would arrive in advance as well. It would be normal for them to arrive 10 days or even half a month earlier. There was not much time left for Rinpoche. If there were people who would arrive a month earlier, Rinpoche was afraid that he would have to go into battle immediately. This was not just a matter of urgency, it was simply a matter of life and death. At the thought of this, Rinpoche immediately jumped up from the sofa. He held onto a book and memorized it by rote for the entire afternoon. He had never worked so hard even when he was in school. This level of hard work could only be compared to the college entrance examination. After half a day, Rinpoche felt dizzy and put down the book. After resting for a while, he changed his clothes and headed to the hotel where Chen Qing and Jiang Nan were getting engaged. When he reached the entrance, he saw Chen Qing in a red suit and Jiang Nan in a red dress. Both of them were standing at the entrance to welcome the guests. Chen Qing came from a wealthy family. Even though Jiang Nan's family was not as wealthy, her parents were both professors and could be considered as a scholarly family. Both of them stood there. They were indeed a talented couple. Yes, as mentioned previously, Jiang Nan was not considered beautiful, but she had an exceptionally attractive intellectual and tranquil charm. Upon seeing Rinpoche, Chen Qing laughed heartily and came over to give him a hug. "The present is me. You have everything that I have and everything that I don't." Rinpoche spread his hands and said. He really did not think of anything to give to Chen Qing. "You are very secretive now. It's good that you are here." Chen Qing smiled and patted his shoulder. Rinpoche grimaced in pain. Chen Qing did not use much strength, but his shoulder had been patted by Caretaker Shi a few times and was already bruised. "Congratulations, Jiang Nan." Rinpoche greeted Jiang Nan again. "I finally get to see the two of you." Jiang Nan's face was filled with happiness. She pursed her lips and smiled. "Thank you. However, I have not seen you for a while. I have been very busy recently, you know that." Rinpoche spread his hands and joked. "Busy eating? You have gained so much weight." Rinpoche laughed heartily. After greeting the two of them, Rinpoche was brought inside and arranged to sit at a table next to the main table. The two families did not organize the engagement too extravagantly. It was just about 4 to 5 tables of relatives and friends who had a good relationship with each other. Xiaoren, you are here. Qin Qing's father greeted him when he saw him. Uncle. Call me Baqian. Otherwise, it sounds like you are scolding me. Ren Baqian said helplessly. This caused Qin Qing's father to laugh heartily. However, it was, after all, an engagement banquet for both parties. There was no time for him to entertain Ren Baqian. Father Chen's main focus was on greeting Jiang Nan's family and getting to know them better. Ren Baqian sipped his tea at the side. In his mind, he was silently reciting the 300 Tang poems that he had memorized in the afternoon to deepen his memory. Following which, Ren Baqian was in a daze. Occasionally, he would come back to his senses and look at Qin Qing and Jiang Nan's joyful faces. He wished them well in his heart. After attending the engagement banquet, Ren Baqian thought about how his mother almost made him go on a blind date 2 days ago. He shook his head slightly. If his situation did not change, he would not be able to find a girlfriend. When he walked out of the hotel, Ren Baqian shrunk his neck as the wind blew at him. The weather was indeed cold. He quickly got into the car and switched on the air conditioner. After a while, he felt a little warmer. After driving home, he turned on his computer and took a look at his newly registered Weibo account. Even though it did not matter if anyone noticed this Weibo account, he still hoped that some people would see it and follow it. After all, it was his footprints from another world. After logging into his account, Ren Baqian saw that there were hundreds of likes and more than 10 comments. He was somewhat happy. He opened up the comments and browsed through them. Almost all of them were asking if he was working at a zoo or which zoo he was in. There were only 2 comments that said that the scenery was pretty good. They asked where he was and wanted to take a look. Sure enough, national treasures were the most attractive. The next day, Ren Baqian memorized books for the whole day. In the afternoon, he felt dizzy and his brain was like a lump of paste. He threw the books aside and went downstairs to drive around. He could relax a little. He wandered around the city aimlessly. When he passed by a corner, he saw a plainly dressed girl walking in front of him with many bags. He sighed in his heart. A few months ago, he was also struggling to survive in the city like this. He didn't drive very fast. When he passed by, he turned his head to take a look. She looked pretty. The next second, he felt that she looked familiar. He pondered for a while and couldn't match the person in his memory. He noticed a red hearing aid on her ear and suddenly remembered who she was. Chapter 69. Ren Baqian looked at her walking by the roadside with her bags. It seemed like she was going to move or go to the train station. He felt a little sympathy for her. After all, he used to be like her. He knew that it wasn't easy for a young person to survive in this city, let alone a disabled girl. Ren Baqian had nothing to do and met this girl who gave him a good impression. He stopped the car not far away, opened the door, and walked to the back of the car. "Do you remember me?" Ren Baqian walked in front of the girl and asked loudly. He didn't know how loud he should be for the girl to hear him. Last time, at a restaurant, a classmate of mine drank too much. He suddenly jumped out like a robber, and the girl was shocked. After seeing the person in front of her, she recalled carefully and showed a look of sudden realization. "Do you need help?" Ren Baqian saw her expression and knew that she remembered him. The girl put the luggage she was carrying on the ground, took out a small notebook from her pocket, and wrote, "I remember, thank you. Do you need help?" Ren Baqian pointed at the luggage again. "Where are you going?" "I can do it myself, thank you," the girl wrote. "Are you going home? To the station?" "I lost my job and changed my residence. I used to live in a dormitory." Ren Baqian was slightly stunned. He didn't expect her to not live there anymore. Although it wasn't difficult for ordinary people to find a job, it was much more difficult for her. After all, not all bosses would accept a disabled person in their shop. But thinking about it, she should have some support groups for the disabled, such as WeChat groups, to help her find a job. "Where do you live? Let me send you there? Consider it an apology for my classmate's rudeness. Anyway, I have nothing to do and am wandering around." Renbachien was telling the truth. He really had nothing to do now. During the day, he had memorized Tang poems. Now, he was wandering around aimlessly. He was completely out to relax. The girl showed a distressed expression. It was indeed difficult for her to carry these things. Although the place she wanted to go wasn't far, it wasn't near either. It's hard to get a taxi in this area. Seeing her expression, Renbachien picked up one of her luggage and said, "Don't worry, I don't have any bad intentions. I just want to apologize for what happened last time. Since I have nothing to do, I will help you if I can. Looking at the things you're carrying, it shouldn't be too far. It won't take me much effort." Seeing this, the girl finally nodded. After getting into the car, she flipped open a "thank you" message and showed it to him. Renbachien waved his hand. "Which way?" The girl wrote down an address. Renbachien took a look at it and entered it into the navigation system. It wasn't too far away. If he were to walk, it would be about 1 kilometer. However, it would indeed be somewhat troublesome to carry these things. "Have you found a new job?" Renbachien asked. "We will find it soon," the girl wrote. From her words, Renbachien could feel her drive. "I'm sorry, what's your name?" Renbachien asked apologetically. The waiter did call his name before, but he had forgotten about it. "Anfi." "Very nice," Renbachien casually praised. Anfi went back to the thank you card. She seemed to have written some common phrases on a piece of paper. Each piece of paper was a word, and when needed, she could just use it. The place that Anfi went to was a relatively old neighborhood. The rubbish bin in the courtyard seemed to have been left uncleaned for 2 days. After sending her downstairs, Anfi wrote on a piece of paper, "Thank you. When I find a new job, I will treat you to a meal. Can you give me your phone number?" Renbachien smiled and wrote his phone number on the paper. Then he watched her walk into the corridor. He sat in the car and stared blankly for a while. He felt that he had changed a lot recently. If it was in the past, he definitely wouldn't have done such a thing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been immersed in his own world after attending school for so many years. He didn't even have a single friend. After coming out for a stroll, he was more or less relaxed. He found a place to have a meal and went back to memorize. When he opened his eyes and saw the familiar wooden beam, Renbachien shook his head and sat up. He was still holding the book, 300 Poems of the Tang Dynasty. Even though he had slept, his brain was still a little numb. He felt that if he continued to memorize, he would become a fool. It was better to go out and play with Gun Gun and Tian Tian. Beside him was a bag filled with white rabbit creamy candies, chocolate, and stun batons. After stuffing 2 stun batons into his waist, Renbachien felt that he had regained the vigor of a Jedi. "From today onwards, I will continue to work hard to slap people with the soles of my shoes in the morning, learn to read in the afternoon, and tell stories to His Majesty at night." After thinking about the things that he had to do every day, Renbachien pushed open the door and picked up 2 pandas who were sleeping soundly. He swung his sword around like a storm before he finally put down the 2 fellows whose eyes were emitting stars. Once Tian Tian and Gun Gun landed on the ground, they stumbled and wanted to find Renbachien to take revenge. In the end, one of them stumbled and knocked into the door frame, while the other stumbled and fell from the stone floor. They rolled and rolled on the ground. Renbachien quickly raised his camera and took a photo of their silly and adorable behavior. When he was eating breakfast, Renbachien suddenly remembered that the fans should be ready. He went out with Teng Hulu and Tai Dao. When he came back, the 2 of them each carried 10 fans. He threw them to Tong Jia and asked him to make the outer box the same way as the previous time. As for the color, there was no need for it. It was not as troublesome as the previous time. Anyway, there was no competition for this thing. He could sell it however he wanted as long as it was useful. If the things he sold were more exquisite than the ones he gave to the Empress, then he would be asking for trouble. "Brother, I've brought back your sect's secret treasure." Just as Renbachien was in a daze, he heard Caretaker Shi's voice. He turned around and saw Caretaker Shi, whose face had yet to recover, tossing an electric baton up and down in his hand. He had a complacent look on his face. Renbachien didn't even need to think to know that this thing was definitely out of battery again. Otherwise, with caretaker Shi's martial prowess, he would definitely not be able to retrieve it. Rinpoche reached out and took the electric baton. He was afraid that Rinpoche would mention the electric baton again, so he diverted his attention and asked, "How's the shop on Jingyang Road? I put up the sign yesterday, but I couldn't find you. Our shaved ice shop's reputation has spread out recently. We didn't do it outside like we did in the beginning. Many people came in after we put up the sign." As expected, caretaker Shi was in high spirits when he mentioned this. Then, he grinned and stretched out his 5 fingers happily. "Just like you said, I tripled the price for foreigners. 15 copper coins a bowl. They had plenty of money anyway. Hey, look at their faces. I haven't felt so carefree in a long time." Chapter 70. In the afternoon, Rinpoche was learning calligraphy from Lin Xiaola in Qingxin Palace Hall when he heard footsteps approaching. It sounded like there were quite a few people. He got up and walked to the entrance of the palace hall. The empress, who was dressed in red, brought 2 palace maids and an imperial guard named Xing. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Rinpoche quickly bowed. Upon hearing his voice, Lin Xiaola immediately scuttled out from behind the table, bounced to the empress's side, and greeted, "Your Majesty." The empress's expression became much gentler when she saw Lin Xiaola. Rinpoche was speechless. Lin Xiaola actually hid her skills so well. No wonder she was able to become a librarian at such a young age. No wonder she gave the milk candy to the empress as a gift. Although he didn't know what their relationship was, they seemed to be familiar with each other from their expressions. The empress walked past him with her entourage. Rinpoche smelled a delicate fragrance and followed them obediently. Upon entering the palace hall, the empress saw a pen and paper on the table with half-written words. "Are you practicing calligraphy? I wasn't familiar with Dayo's language previously." "I'm learning Dayo's language," Rinpoche explained from behind. The empress nodded her head. As the storyteller of Qingxin Palace Hall, you naturally need to be literate. If those fellows in the imperial court could do the same, it would save her a lot of trouble. "How's your learning?" The empress picked up the piece of paper with Rinpoche's scrawled handwriting and looked at it. Rinpoche's handwriting made her reminisce. When she was 3 years old, her handwriting should be like this too. It should be better than this. "In another 2 months, I should be able to read most of the words," Rinpoche replied. He was talking about reading, not writing. Even though he had to write every word a few times, it was to deepen his memory. He would forget most of it in no time. Writing still had to be practiced slowly in the future. The empress nodded her head and didn't say anything else. She continued to lead the entourage in. Rinpoche carefully followed behind and went straight to the 2nd floor. After being here for so many days, this was the first time he went up to the 2nd floor. What surprised him the most was that there was actually an old lady with white hair and a beard in an official's robe guarding the 2nd floor. He had never seen her come down during these few days. He also didn't hear any sound from upstairs and thought that there was no one here. "Greetings, Your Majesty. What books are you looking for?" The old woman stood up and smiled at the empress. "Supervisor Lin, how's your health recently?" the empress asked. "I'm fine. It's been a long time since I've had my old illness." Supervisor Lin coughed lightly after she finished speaking. Rinpoche looked at him with disdain and said, "You're still pretending. Keep pretending. I've been here for so long, yet you haven't moved at all like a ghost. You're already coughing the moment the empress comes." But his surname is Lin? Could Lin Xiaola be her daughter or granddaughter? One is a librarian, and the other is a librarian. Are they preparing for their daughter to inherit the family inheritance? Rinpoche glanced at Lin Xiaola. On the other side, the empress said warmly, "Supervisor Lin, you still have to take care of your health. Send 3 tails of red snake seed and 5 stalks of 100 core grass from the medicine storehouse in a while. I'm here to look for the record of Dongxian." "I suddenly feel like flipping through it," the empress said. "I'm going to get it for Her Majesty," Librarian Lin bowed and said. Then she walked toward the inside with her hunched body. I also want to see if there's anything else that I'm interested in, the Empress said again. Librarian Lin stopped in her tracks and made a please gesture. Renbaqian looked at the Empress moving forward again. He didn't know whether he should follow her or not. Seeing that the others had already left, he followed behind. Speaking of which, he was also very curious about the difference between the books on the second floor and the first floor. According to common sense, the books on the second floor should be more precious than the ones on the first floor. The second floor was also filled with rooms. Every room was about the same size as the one below. However, one couldn't see what was inside. There was a layer of soft paper between the grids on the door, and nothing could be seen inside. Your Majesty, it's here. When they reached the third last door, Librarian Lin stopped in her tracks and pushed open the door beside her. The Empress went in, followed by Librarian Lin. After that, Exen just stood at the door. Renbaqian didn't even see what was inside. At the same time, he was even more curious. It was so well guarded. What exactly was inside? The record of Dongxian? A martial arts secret manual of this world? Renbaqian felt that it was highly possible. This name didn't sound as common as 300 Poems of the Tang Dynasty. Furthermore, the Empress's martial arts was so high that it was reasonable for her to read martial arts secret manuals. Renbaqian stood obediently at the door. Occasionally, he raised his head and looked around, wondering when the Empress would come out. Coincidentally, he saw Lin Xiaola not far away from him. He immediately grinned and almost laughed out loud. He saw Lin Xiaola standing there, swaying, and her eyes were already closed. An ordinary person would never think that she was actually asleep just by looking at the extent of her swaying. This kind of ability to sleep while standing definitely wasn't something an ordinary person could compare with. Renbaqian had to admit that the temptation of the white rabbit creamy candy was indeed not small. It actually made Lin Xiaola take time out of her busy sleep to teach Renbaqian how to read. For a person who could sleep while standing here waiting for her superior, an ordinary person definitely wouldn't know how much she craved sleep. Perhaps lying in bed and sleeping till the end of time was the best ending for her. Bang! Renbaqian looked up and indeed, Lin Xiaola's head had knocked into the wooden wall beside her. He lowered his head and made a laughing gesture. Not only him, but Qin Yuan and Hong Wan also covered their mouths and laughed softly. It seemed that the two of them already knew about Lin Xiaola's situation. What happened? The Empress's voice came from inside the room. Nothing, I accidentally knocked into the wall. Lin Xiaola covered her head and quickly answered. She was angry for a long time before she rubbed her head and put her hand down. Not long after, she started to sway again. Renbaqian thought for a while and felt that Lin Xiaola might be sick. He remembered seeing on the news that there was a girl who had a strange illness and could only sleep 18 to 20 hours a day. She couldn't even work normally. Lin Xiaola might be this kind of person. However, her illness wasn't as serious as the other parties. Only those who had nothing to do would feel sleepy and unable to resist it. Usually, she would still be able to wake up if there was a sound. Or if there was something to do, she could still force herself to stay awake. After waiting for a while, the door opened again. The Empress and Librarian Lin walked out one after another. The moment the two of them came out, Lin Xiaola quickly widened her eyes as if she was glaring at someone. Soon after, she slowly calmed down and yawned. Renbaqian took a glance and saw the Empress coming out with 2 books in her hands. She glanced at Renbaqian indifferently and asked him to stand up straight. After sending the Empress out of the hall, Renbaqian and Lin Xiaola returned to the hall. Librarian Lin didn't come down from upstairs and only sent them to the staircase. Are you really that sleepy? Renbaqian asked Lin Xiaola curiously. A normal person could only sleep 8 hours a day. Even if they slept too much, they couldn't fall asleep even if they wanted to. He really couldn't understand how the other party could sleep so much. I'm all right, Lin Xiaola said listlessly as she lay on the table. Looking at her appearance, Renbaqian felt that it was rather amusing. He casually threw a piece of Dove chocolate on the table. Try it, it's on you. Just as the chocolate flew out, Lin Xiaola caught it in her hands like an invisible hand. After removing the wrapper, Lin Xiaola carefully took a bite. Then, like a hamster, she ate it in 2 or 3 bites and looked at Rinpochen with sparkling eyes. Rinpochen had a kind smile on his face. He thought that if he made chocolate-flavored feces, she would really eat it. A gentleman's revenge is never too late. Chapter 71. Rinpochen did not learn for long before the imperial guard named Exen brought the medicine to the 2nd floor. After she came down, she pointed at Rinpochen and said, "Follow me to see Her Majesty." He pushed the pen and paper to the side, got up, and followed Exen. Behind him, Lin Xiaola was fuming as she looked at his back view. After snorting twice, she reluctantly put away the pen and paper. For the sake of Rinpochen's white rabbit creamy candies every day. The familiar path was the same palace that he always went to. After entering, he found that a burly man in an official uniform was already standing inside. However, it was a little different from his own. The main body was black with a beast pattern on it, and the collar was yellow. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Rinpochen stopped 1 step behind that person and bowed. That burly man turned his head to look at Rinpochen and asked with a grin, "Your Majesty, is this the guy?" "This is the storyteller of Qingshin Palace Hall. This time, he will accompany you in receiving those people." The cold voice of the Empress came from above. "That's good. I think those people are already very annoyed. All of them don't have much ability and are a bunch of fart. If it weren't for the fact that they came to give gifts, they would have already cut off their heads and kicked them like a ball." The big man laughed loudly. "Rinpochen, this is the Honglu Vice Minister. From tomorrow onwards, you can report to him. You don't have to go to Qingshin Palace Hall for the time being. As for the position, it would be in the Honglu Bureau." "Gu Daxiong, are there any vacant positions?" the Empress asked from above. It had to be said that Gu Daxiong really lived up to his name. He looked like a bear with a huge body and a face full of stubble like a human bear. Rinpochen lowered his head. He knew about the Honglu Bureau, which was responsible for external reception and various etiquettes. It was equivalent to a foreign affairs department. Since he was responsible for the reception of those people, it was perfectly justifiable for him to have his name in this department. Honglu Junior official Gu Daxiong pondered for a moment before suggesting, "Why not we take up the position of Honglu deputy? I remember that seat isn't empty, right?" the Empress asked. "I'll go back and give him a vacation. Anyway, he wants to quit long ago." Gu Daxiong grinned. Rinpochen was speechless as he listened from the side. There was actually such an operation? What an eye-opener. "He's called Qiji? I remember that he broke the legs of 4 people from the Yun Nation last year, and one of them even complained to me." "So be it." The Empress's voice was heard, and both of them bowed in agreement. "How about this? If there's nothing else, you can leave." After the Empress finished speaking lazily, Qing Yuan, who was at the side, served a plate of grapes. The Empress plucked one and placed it in her mouth. "This subject shall take his leave." After Gu Daxiong finished speaking, he retreated. Before he left, he grinned at Rinpochen, revealing a mouthful of snow-white teeth that glistened under the illumination of the lights in the hall. "Come forward and continue your story." The Empress reclined on the couch. Her eyes were painted red, and her lips were as red as blood. When she plucked a grape and placed it in her mouth, her actions were extremely moving and made one's heart tremble. Rinpochen hurriedly lowered his head after taking a glance. He was so close to sticking his head into the ground. "Oh, storyteller Rin, raise your head and look straight at me. Why are you lowering your head?" The Empress chuckled, looking languid and unrestrained. Rinpochen raised his head to take a glance and almost lowered his head again. Normally, the Empress was still fine. Even though she was beautiful, she was too cold and could only be observed from afar. However, today she was lying on the couch, wearing a red muslin, looking languid and charming. Her posture as she gently placed the grape in her mouth made him feel like he was being teased. He coughed awkwardly and said, "Your Majesty's beauty is unparalleled in the world, like the bright sun in the sky." I feel ashamed of my inferiority and find it hard to look straight at you. Unparalleled in the world? The Empress asked. Yes, no one in the world can compare to you. Renbaqian lowered his head and replied. The celebrities on Earth were seen on TV every day. In terms of appearance, they were similar, but their identities were different. This was the monarch of a nation. That kind of excitement made Renbaqian's heart jump up and down. If he were to jump any further, his heart would jump out. You really know how to talk, the Empress said with a smile. Tell me about investiture of the gods. The story of your nation is indeed interesting. Renbaqian hurriedly responded. He opened his mouth for a long time and finally calmed himself down before he began to narrate the story. He only stopped when he reached the part where Baigan dug out his heart. According to usual practice, he should have stopped at this time. The lamp oil in the hall had been refilled several times. Tell me another part. I don't feel comfortable if I stop here, the Empress suddenly said. Renbaqian didn't expect the Empress to speak at this time. Today, the Empress was much more human than usual and less cold. He hurriedly nodded his head in response. Fortunately, he had completed Investiture of the Gods. If he were to read those web novels where chapters were missing, he would probably be in trouble. He narrated until Grand Tutor went to the East Sea to quell the chaos. Finally, he said, if you want to know the outcome, listen to the next chapter. After finishing the story in one breath, he felt refreshed and could finally get off work. Then he wanted to give himself a slap. Did he really think of himself as a storyteller? What he was doing was just a matter of missing chapters. Sure enough, these were all passed down from generation to generation. Those web novels were just copying the wisdom of the ancient people. He looked up at the Empress and saw her squinting at him. She had no intention of speaking. Renbaqian continued to narrate until Ji Chang went to fetch Chong City. The Empress then stood up and said, "It's late, you can go now. For the next few days, just prepare for the Honglu Bureau. Also, make a few trips to the Imperial Kitchen when you are free. Teach them a few Chinese dishes for the banquet." Renbaqian bowed and asked, "Your Majesty, how are the arrangements for the banquet? What does your Majesty want?" "What do you mean?" The Empress was slightly puzzled. In China, there are delicious dishes of color and fragrance. There are also some dishes that taste good but aren't in good condition, making it hard for people to eat. There are also some dishes that are only suitable for specific people, for example, especially spicy dishes, Renbaqian said softly. This was what he suddenly thought of after the Empress spoke. The Empress didn't like those people. She even wanted him to be the vanguard to criticize them. Whether they could eat the banquet would depend on the mood of the Empress in front of him. Renbaqian felt that he was getting better at playing the role of a lackey. "This is interesting." The Empress laughed. "Let's see who it is. But have you prepared the toffee?" "It's ready. Shall I send it to the palace tomorrow?" Renbaqian quickly asked. "No need. You go ahead with other matters. I will get someone to fetch it tomorrow morning." Renbaqian bowed and took his leave. After leaving the palace, Renbaqian recalled what happened just now and felt that he was a little too bold. He actually recklessly guessed the Empress's intentions and even pointed it out. But it didn't look too bad. Chapter 72. Early the next morning, Renbaqian was awakened by a knock on his door. When he opened the door, he saw a delicate face. It was actually Qing Yuan. She was standing outside the door with 2 guards nearby. His toes were still teasing Tian Tian and Gun Gun, who were rolling around on the side. "Greetings, Miss Qing Yuan." Renbaqian cupped his hands in greeting. He didn't know what to call it either. After all, the people in the imperial palace in ancient China were all eunuchs, so it was easier to address them. But those movies and television dramas didn't mention how to address the palace maids. He reckoned that Qing Yuan and Hong Luan were definitely of a higher grade than him. He thought for a moment and decided to just call her Mississippi. In any case, even if it was wrong, the other party wouldn't be able to find anything wrong with it. Qing Yuan stood up and smiled. When she saw Renbaqian, she wasn't unfamiliar with him. After all, she saw him every day. Furthermore, as the Empress's person, she was clear about some of the Empress's thoughts. She knew that Rinpoche might be put in an important position in the future. After all, he knew a lot of things and could speak well. He was a talent. Storyteller Rin, where's the thing for Her Majesty? Qing Yuan laughed. Rinpoche hurriedly returned to the house, took out the bag, and handed it to Qing Yuan. At the same time, he stuffed a small bag that weighed about half a kilo into her hands. Here they are. Other than milk candies, there are other things. They were specially prepared for Your Majesty. As for this, it's for Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, Rinpoche said. He had just packed the bag when he went back, and there were still some bags left in the house after going back and forth a few times. With Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan's status, they probably didn't lack money. Maids and female officials weren't as eager to make money as eunuchs, especially with their status. I might as well put half a caddy of White Rabbit creamy candies in it. This thing can be used as a stepping stone in the palace. Currently, it has been successful. Qing Yuan's eyes curved. No wonder His Majesty thinks so highly of him. He is indeed an exquisite person. Thank you for your praise. I don't deserve it. Rinpoche cupped his hands in obeisance. In that case, I shall not disturb you any further. Her Majesty is still waiting in the palace. Qing Yuan waved a small bag at Rinpoche before turning around and leaving. Not long after, he handed the bag for His Majesty to the Imperial Guard and held the small bag behind his back. Looking up at the sky, he estimated that it was about 7 o'clock. Rinpoche suddenly felt that he should get the watch back. At least he could look at the time. If this thing was sold, it should be able to fetch a high price, but the source of the goods was hard to say. Even though the Empress knew some things about him, he couldn't let others suspect him anymore. After all, she was the ruler of a nation and the 7th most powerful expert in the world. Her magnanimity was far beyond that of an ordinary person. Other people might not be as broad-minded as the Empress. If someone wanted to know his secret, he would be in trouble. It was better to get the mechanical blueprint of the clock and find someone to make it. More sophisticated processing equipment was not difficult to obtain. At most, he would wear one watch and give one to the Empress. He went to the kitchen and took a look around. When he saw that there was vegetable soup, he scooped a bowl of it and ate it together with some other grains. After that, he changed his clothes and brought Tinghulu and Tai Dao to the Honglu Bureau. The Honglu Bureau was located in the Pearl Curtain district, not far from the Beihong district. Along the way, they did not encounter any fights. However, when they arrived at the Pearl Curtain district, they met a few people from the Public Order Bureau who were pushing a few badly battered people. It seemed like they were going to be whipped for fighting. One of the burly men from the Public Order Bureau was slightly stunned when he saw Rinpoche. Following which, he sized him up carefully, called out to the others and walked towards Rinpoche. Rinpoche? Rinpoche smiled bitterly and nodded his head. Needless to say, he was definitely one of the 8 people who were beaten up by caretaker Shi. Did you give the thing to that bastard Shi Wanshan? That burly man's face immediately became unfriendly. I was robbed, I'm innocent. Rinpoche said helplessly. Can you use the secret treasure of your sect? Lend it to me. Otherwise, let's draw a circle, that burly man shouted. Rinpoche felt Tinghulu and Tai Dao behind him take a step forward. He was satisfied. It was worth it to have these 2 underlings. In any case, it was enough for them to stand up for him when he was in trouble. He waved his hand behind him. Now that I'm the Honglu deputy, I can choose not to accept your challenge. Rinpoche smiled casually. According to his understanding, the Honglu deputy should have a higher position than this burly man. He could choose not to accept the challenge just because his position was higher. It was fine if he was bullied by the Empress, but caretaker Shi was on good terms with him. Rinpoche couldn't bully everyone. There's such a thing? That bastard Shi Wanshan didn't mention it before? Aren't you from the Beast Park? That burly man scratched his head in confusion. Rinpoche cupped his hands and said, I'm about to report to the Honglu deputy. You are the first outsider to take up an official position in Dayo. Forget it, your position is higher than mine. That burly man looked at Rinpoche and grinned. He didn't seem to mind at all, waved his hand at him and left. Rinpoche looked at his back and shook his head slightly. This person wasn't bad. He was similar to the Aboriginal men that Rinpoche had met before, but a little vulgar. However, from his attitude, Rinpoche could tell that if he didn't have an official position in Dayo, it would be difficult for him to do anything. The Aboriginals weren't polite to outsiders. He shouldn't even think about being a wealthy man. Unless he went to another country, but it wouldn't necessarily be a good outcome. Therefore, it was better to cozy up to the Empress in the future. Based on his experience in the Beast Park and the Palace, the Dayo people weren't averse to becoming one of their own after holding a position or official position. Regardless of whether it was caretaker Sure or a few other caretakers, or even the odd job workers and their family members, they were all the same. It was the same for some of the people he met in the palace. Let's go. Rinpoche gestured for the two people behind him to head to the Honglu deputy. Outside the Honglu deputy was a huge courtyard with a few tall buildings. From the main gate, one could see that there was a passageway leading to the back of the building. The two burly men at the entrance were dressed differently from the palace guards and the people from the Public Order Bureau that Rinpoche had seen just now. It was a sleeveless shirt, revealing two thick, muscular arms. In addition, the two of them had ferocious faces and murderous eyes, which made it impossible for strangers to approach them. If one didn't know better, they would have thought that they were in prison. In a normal diplomatic department, wouldn't they find a few good-natured people who were easy to deal with? However, Dayo had specially placed two fiendish-looking men to guard the entrance. They couldn't wait to keep everyone out. They were simply a weirdo in the diplomatic department. This is the Honglu deputy. What's the matter? One of them stopped Rinpoche and said fiercely, "Look for Gu Shaoqing. Tell him that Rinpoche is here to report," Rinpoche said. Report? That person sized up Rinpoche suspiciously. Wait a minute. The other person turned and entered the courtyard. Rinpoche felt that he should have worn his official robes. Originally, he thought that there was no need to wear the official robes of the palace since he was here to report to the Honglu deputy. He didn't expect that there would be trouble everywhere. Previously, he didn't feel it when he was walking in the city. Today, he really felt it. Not long after, that person came out and said, "Go in, Sir Gu is waiting for you." Chapter 73. As soon as he entered the courtyard, he was greeted by a burly man with bell-like eyes and short stubble. He grabbed Rinpoche's shoulder and asked, "Are you Rinpoche?" Rinpoche nodded. "I will depend on you in the future." The burly man grabbed Rinpoche's shoulders and shook him back and forth. For some reason, Rinpoche felt that these words were like a dying wish. Then, the burly man laughed out loud. "I finally don't have to deal with those bastards. I want to pinch them to death every time." Looking at his ecstatic expression, it was as if he had been sentenced to at least 3 years and was suddenly released. Rinpoche looked at him with bright eyes. Needless to say, this was the former Honglu deputy, the one who broke the legs of 4 people and was reported. Rinpoche was curious. Was it so painful to deal with foreigners in the Honglu Bureau? That burly man laughed wildly for a long time before patting Rinpoche's shoulder and saying, "Boss Gu is waiting for you at the back. Turn right from here to the biggest house." Then, he threw his head back and laughed out loud. Rinpoche followed the direction he pointed and passed through the first row of buildings. There was a row of slightly shorter buildings at the back, and the door of the largest building on the right was open. "Sir Gu." Rinpoche got the two of them to stay where they were and shouted as he walked to the door. Gu Daxiong was sitting behind a desk. The desk was empty except for 2 big feet. It was different from an ordinary office. There was nothing on the desk. "Come in." Gu Daxiong raised his head and waved at Rinpoche. "Did you see Qiji? You should have met him before." Rinpoche felt that they were talking about the burly man from just now. "Yes, he ran away. From now on, you will be in charge until the group of people leave after His Majesty's birthday celebration. All I ask is that they don't bother me, and you can do whatever you want. If you don't like him, just beat him up. Just don't kill him. Gu Daxiong casually threw a token on the table. Renbaqian was speechless as he took the token. Go find Gu Shou and get a set of official robes to alter first. If you see that there's nothing to do in the courtyard, take away the servants and use them. Just one thing, don't let them bother me, Gu Daxiong grinned and reiterated. Renbaqian could only nod. It seemed like he was really throwing everything to him this time. The officials of Deyo were indeed different from the flirtatious and cheap people of other places. Sir Gu, when exactly is Her Majesty's birthday celebration? How much longer until then? Renbaqian cupped his hands and asked. There are still 22 days left. He reckoned that someone would come in the next 2 days. Some of them will stay in the residences of the envoys from other countries, while others will be arranged by them. The rest will be up to you. Where are they arranged? Renbaqian asked again. There had to be a place for them to be arranged. Find Gu Shou, he will tell you where to go, Gu Daxiong said. If anything happens to them, or if there's any trouble, if they deserve to be beaten, then beat them up. They were the ones who insisted on coming over. No one begged them to come over. Gu Daxiong interrupted Renbaqian. When Renbaqian saw this, he felt that it was better to wait and see. Sir Gu, one last question. What if the opponent is an expert? With my skills, I can't beat anyone, Renbaqian finally asked. If he was beaten up by someone else, he would definitely be buried by the Empress. Gu Daxiong looked at Renbaqian suspiciously. Even though Renbaqian's physique was a little thin and weak, and he didn't look like he could fight, but Her Majesty actually arranged for a weakling to come over? In any case, Renbaqian was the storyteller of Qingxin Palace Hall, and that old lady was very powerful. After finishing his sentence, Gu Daxiong stood up and walked towards the door. When he passed by Renbaqian, he swung his arm and almost flipped Renbaqian over. Why don't you have any strength at all? Gu Daxiong turned his head and looked at Renbaqian doubtfully. Renbaqian was pushed back a few steps. Looking at Gu Daxiong's innocent and doubtful face, he could only sigh. Gu Daxiong walked to the door and shouted, Xiong Pai, get your ass over here. This shout was really earth-shattering, and the Honglu Bureau was immediately thrown into chaos. Boss, he's here, he's here. A loud voice came from afar. When the person appeared at the door, Renbaqian immediately felt as if a wall had suddenly appeared in front of the door. Even half of the light outside the door was blocked, and the room became dark in an instant. The person who appeared at the door was a burly man who was more than 2 meters tall. He was bald, bare-chested, and wore a pair of cloth pants. His entire body was bulging with muscles, and there were many scratches on his body that looked like those left by wild beasts. Gu Daxiong's physique was like that of a bear, but the person outside was taller and stronger than him. Xiong Pai were the largest of their kind, and the person at the door really lived up to his name. Compared to him, Caretaker Shi was not much stronger than a chicken. Xiong Pai, this is the newly appointed deputy. You will follow him for the next few days, and beat up whoever he tells you to beat up. Oh, greetings, deputy. Su Dali cupped his hands towards Renbaqian. His voice was a little muffled and he seemed a little silly. Renbaqian walked to Gu Daxiong's side and compared the difference in their physiques. Gu Daxiong's arms were almost as thick as his waist. Just by standing there, he was like King Kong, giving people a huge sense of oppression. Especially when looking at the scars on his body from such a close distance, Renbaqian felt that his entire body was emitting a fierce aura. If a hatchet man was to be graded based on his appearance, Renbaqian felt that he could be given a score of 9. He gave off 1 mark because he was afraid that Xiong Pai would become arrogant. As long as his strength is not at the heaven rank, no one can defeat him. Gu Daxiong hammered his chest twice, producing a thumping sound. Xiong Pai revealed a simple and honest smile, and there were still shreds of meat in the gaps between his teeth. Was heaven rank the division of strength in this world? Renbaqian did not know whether it was heaven rank, man rank, heaven rank, heaven rank, heaven rank, or upwards ho. In any case, heaven rank should be very powerful, and he did not know what rank the Empress was at. Renbaqian cupped his hands and thanked, "Thank you, Sir Gu." "It's all right." Looking at your small physique, he will follow you for the next few days. Gu Daxiong waved his hands. Then where should I look for Gusho? The house at the very end. Gu Daxiong pointed to the left side of the main door. Thank you, then I will take my leave. Renbachien walked out of the door, and Xiong Pai followed him. Renbachien turned his head and looked at Xiong Pai. Xiong Pai was much taller than him, and he had to raise his head to look at Xiong Pai's face. When Xiong Pai walked, Renbachien could feel the tremors under his feet. I will have to take care of you for the next few days. Everyone has to complete the tasks given by the higher-ups, Renbachien said to Xiong Pai. Deputy, I will beat up whoever you tell me to. Xiong Pai grinned and gave a simple and honest smile. Yes, it sounded crude, but the logic was not crude. That was exactly what he meant. Renbachien nodded his head in satisfaction and went to the room at the very end to look for Gusho. After entering, he realized that Gu Daxiong was one size smaller. Even his actions were exactly the same. He was sitting on a chair, and both his legs were directly placed on the table. Chapter 74. Gusho threw an official robe to Renbachien. If it was worn by someone else, it might be just right or slightly loose, but if it was worn by Renbachien, it would be unsightly. He held it in his hands and prepared to find a tailor shop to change it. Originally, Teng Hulu and Tai Dao were his two bodyguards. Now, with Xiong Pai, they were nothing. Standing in front of Xiong Pai, one would have to look up to him. Although Teng Hulu and Tai Dao were not small, they were only about 1.75 meters tall, similar to Renbachien. It was just that their bodies were much more muscular and weighed at least 100 kilograms. But compared to Xiong Pai, they were as thin and weak as chicks. Renbachien pressed on Xiong Pai's arm. It was as if it was made of steel. Sir Ren, this is? The two asked. This is Xiong Pai. He will be following me for the next few days. Both of you can go back first, Renbachien said. Deal with those animal hides as soon as possible. I still need them. The two nodded their heads. They were originally from the Beast Park. They followed Renbachien every day because it was easy for something to happen when Renbachien went out alone. With Xiong Pai by his side, the two of them had nothing to worry about. What do you usually do in the division? Renbachien asked Xiong Pai after the two of them left. Drink, sleep, and practice martial arts. Xiong Pai grinned. Practice martial arts? What do you practice? Renbachien asked with interest. Deputy, you will know when you come. Xiong Pai led Renbachien around the row of houses. There was a field at the back. At this moment, there were 5 or 6 people there. A few of them were practicing martial arts. Their movements were very fast and powerful. There was also someone lifting a stone block. It was the kind that weighed 100 kilograms. He raised it horizontally and put it down again and again. When Renbachien arrived, he saw that the other party was sweating profusely. He had done more than 30 stone blocks in a row and was still the same. Renbachien did not know how many stone blocks he had done. What do you usually do? Renbachien asked. He was curious about Xiong Pai's strength. After all, there were not many people with such a physique in Dayo. Although physique did not represent strength, Gu Daxiong had specially asked Xiong Pai to follow him. Presumably, Xiong Pai's strength was top-notch. My lord, please watch from the side, lest you get hurt. Xiong Pai grinned and walked to the side. There was a big stone that was 1 meter square. He directly hugged it with both hands and shouted loudly. He lifted the huge stone up to his eyebrows and slowly put it down. Then he raised it again and put it down again. Renbachien, who was standing at the side, opened his mouth and was almost stunned by him. One had to know that a 1 meter square stone weighed 2 to 3 tons, and he lifted it just like that? Moreover, he raised and lowered it several times. Finally, with a loud shout, he directly threw the stone over his head, throwing it 2 to 3 meters high. Damn! Renbachien couldn't help but speak. If it landed like that, an ordinary person would have been smashed into a meat patty. It would be easier for Renbachien to accept if he were to toss 200 to 150 kilograms into the air. But this was 2 to 3 tons, almost the weight of a car. Xiong Pai, on the other hand, caught it calmly and steadily. He only pressed his legs down a little to cushion the impact. Then, he threw the stone up again and caught it again. When Xiong Pai threw the stone for fun, the other player couldn't play anymore. He got a stone that weighed 1 or 200 kilograms, but Xiong Pai got a stone that was 20 times the size. How could he play? It was embarrassing. All right, stop. Ren Baqian hurriedly shouted. Looking at Xiong Pai's training movements made him a little dizzy. His heart was trembling and he always felt that if he missed, a freshly made pizza would appear in front of him. If Xiong Pai were to dye his entire body green, he could become the Hulk. Wouldn't it attract suspicion? Upon hearing Ren Baqian's shout, Xiong Pai immediately turned around and walked away. He didn't even catch the stone and smashed it on the ground, causing the entire ground to tremble. Let's go and change your official uniform first. Ren Baqian looked at Xiong Pai in front of him. Even after throwing a 2 to 3 ton stone a few times, he didn't even break a sweat. After bringing Xiong Pai out, Ren Baqian felt that he didn't have to worry about being hit by people when he walked. With such a guy behind him, no one would be blind enough to bump into him. Xiong Pai's physique was rather terrifying for the people of Dayo. He was the kind that would attract sidelong glances wherever he went. Julian District basically had more yamen offices and very few residences and shops. Ren Baqian directly brought Xiong Pai to Gujiazhai District. There were more residences there and it should be easier to find a shop for changing clothes. Just as he entered the main street of Gujiazhai, he saw a shaved ice shop at the side. There were many people sitting inside and they were all there to avoid the summer heat and eat shaved ice. This was still in the morning. If it was in the afternoon, there would be more people. Qingshan. Ren Baqian went in and shouted. Sai, Sir Ren. Shi Qingshan raised his head and shouted. The dust on the roof beam kept falling. Lower your voice, don't be so loud. Ren Baqian rubbed his ears and said, Give me 2 bowls of shaved ice, any fruit. Then he found an empty table and sat down. Sit here. Ren Baqian patted the stool beside him. Xiong Pai shook his head and said, I'd better not sit. Said I said so. Ren Baqian insisted. There was no reason for him to stand while he was sitting. He still needed his protection from now on. Seeing that Ren Baqian insisted, Xiong Pai slowly sat down. Crack. The long stool immediately broke. Xiong Pai got into a horse stance, stood up and scratched his head. I'd better stand. Ren Baqian was speechless. It seemed like Xiong Pai had broken 1 or 2 stools from sitting and was already experienced. Looking at Xiong Pai's physique, Ren Baqian called out to Shi Qingshan, Give me another bowl of shaved ice. When the 3 bowls of shaved ice were served, Ren Baqian picked the color that suited him the best and pushed the other 2 bowls to Xiong Pai. This is for you. Don't eat too quickly. Along the way, he felt that Xiong Pai was a little silly and was somewhat similar to Tong Jia. Ren Baqian was only halfway through his meal when he looked up and saw that Xiong Pai had already finished 2 bowls. He was still licking his lips and had a satisfied look on his face. This is cooling. Xiong Pai laughed foolishly. Ren Baqian quickly finished his bowl and looked up to call out to Shi Qingshan, Qingshan, where do you find clothes changing? Walk 300 steps forward and there will be one in the alley next to it. Let's go. Ren Baqian called out and brought Xiong Pai to the location that Shi Qingshan pointed out. Indeed, they saw an alley that turned right. It was only 2 meters wide and there were wooden houses at the side. After walking for a while, they didn't see a single signboard. Brother, can I ask where the clothes-changing shop is? Ren Baqian called out to a burly man who had just come out of the house to pour some water. You have walked past it. That's the one. That man took a glance at Ren Baqian and then looked at Xiong Pai, who was behind him. He stretched out his hand and pointed. Ren Baqian turned around and saw that the man was pointing at the 3rd door at the entrance of the alley. Thanks, brother. Ren Baqian laughed, turned around, and entered the house with Xiong Pai. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.